Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another week of Growing with My Fellow Growers. I'm your host, Jack Greenstock, joined as always by an amazing panel. We're a little short this week. I'm going to kick it over first to Spartan Grown, or not Spartan Grown, usually Spartan Grown, but first, Dr. MJ.
Hey, I will be first today. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com. I am excited for another week of growing with my fellow growers. It looks like it's just the core group. Actually, the core group's not even here, but a few of the core group are here. So fun
It's good to
show.
have you back. I will say that Spartan Grown is feeling a little under the weather since I mentioned him already, and he won't be joining us this week. And I believe Kyle Breeder is busy with work, and one other was sick as well. So I hope everybody out there is feeling well and taking care of themselves. But next up, and last, who's currently with us, we've got Matthew Gates.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I have a few things prepared actually. We could potentially go to, but I look forward to talking with the chat as always. This is Matthew Gates, IPM specialist, pest mitigation, and all that sort of a thing. So look forward to talking.
I guess if you do have something prepared while we wait for chat questions, you could start it off. I know Brandon Russ had mentioned that he had something, but I think he might be one of the others who's under the weather as well. I need to go back to my Instagram and check us, running around, getting everything ready.
Around. I don't know if that's what it's getting everybody this time.
RSV, flu. I mean, there's like a bunch of stuff going around. The thing that's been going around for the last few years is still going around, and so we've got a whole bunch of different things. But good reminder to wash your hands and maybe keep distant from people that you don't know too much. And I don't know. I think those are good habits for any avoiding illness in general. But that being said, Matthew, do you want to go ahead and start us off?
Well, yeah, I do. It's a paper that is actually in my file here. I just have to get to it, I suppose.
Noah the
But it's about
Grower is also under the weather. Sorry. While you pull it up, I
oh
wanted to let the
yeah.
chat know that Noah will not be making it tonight either. He's feeling a little under the weather as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can manage a crowd. Basically, uh, this is a paper about something very interesting. I did post on Instagram today, so if you saw my post, then you know what it's about, people on the internet. But it's a very interesting paper. It's about how spider mites have evolved to avoid caterpillars because on that voracious train of herbivory, if they don't get out of the way, they're going to get munched, believe it or not. So they were able to find some extract from not extract, but traces. They're very careful about the way they use it, traces. But here, let me just use the search. It's not coming up. That is really weird because I did just download this. Well, if we want to take a question or something from chat, I rescind my
I haven't seen
crowd
any yet, but
management.
I'll shout out some of the great people. We've got the Jeffro 42069, Collective Mary Jane, Rob Champ, Crispy Wannabe, one of our regulars and all-time favorites. Obviously, Swamp Poker's probably there. My chat is not updating right now, but I'm scrolling up, not down.
There.
A lot of good people with us already.
Indeed. Give us your questions, guys. This is a Q&A growing with my fellow growers, but we'll fill in the time.
Chilbert UK says cheers. Always thankful for everyone showing up. I appreciate Chilbert. Seen him on some other shows and always appreciate seeing him in our chat. Good dude in the UK and lots of great people over there. Unfortunately, having to kind of keep their heads down a little bit more than most of us, but they're still fighting the good fight and growing the good plant and doing a hell of a job with it. So hats off to them. And unfortunately not masks off. Chilbert sometimes comes on with like a Halloween mask, even when it's not Halloween, so that he could at least be on camera without showing his face. So great dude, Chilbert there. And lots of great people in the chat. But Matthew, it looks like I am now seeing your article showing up on screen. So take it away.
Yeah, so this is interesting. It is important to say this is a preprint. This is out of Kyoto University. So this is preprint. So like we said in our last analysis, you gotta see the context of the paper, right? It'll allow you to understand things like, well, is it coming out of a predatory journal, or other sorts of things like that. Sort of guide that. So here's a preprint. it needs to be reviewed more extensively. And I'm sure Dr. Coco has some impressions about that.
Yeah, sometimes preprints are already through the peer review process, and other times they're not. So you don't really know necessarily, but it's always good that it's been disclosed. I mean, all you can do is take that with, okay, this is a preliminary report. And, you know, if you were going to change maybe your operating procedures about something, you'd wait to see a final report. You know, important things sometimes get changed in that peer review process because, you know, you send your analysis to other people that have been doing this for, you know, decades. It's their career or whatever. They have interesting insights, new ways to potentially interpret your data. And often those rewrites of subsequent drafts in that peer review process is, you know, fairly significant and may really change some of the conclusions. So, you know, that's all fair game in something like this.
I think that's very well said. So this paper basically depicts how two species of spider mites here, we got Tetranicus kanzawai and our old friend Tetranicus urticae, which is the one that you're probably familiar with, the two-spot spider mite. That's what most people deal with.
Screw those guys.
Yeah, seriously. So these two, they're very, I mean, they say in the first sentence, they say that these spider mites are very small and they can so incidentally be consumed along with the food plant from other, in this case, lepidopteran or moth larvae, hereafter caterpillars, right? So I looked at 4 different species here. I don't necessarily need to go into the details of that. I'm going to try to be disciplined here. They do talk about this as if it is intragill predation, which is an interesting ecological phenomenon. You're probably familiar with it, even if you don't know the name for this behavior. But it's competition between two organisms that fight for the same resource, and a lot of times it's lethal, and a lot of times the most simplest way to do it is just eat the other one. You either eat their young or you kill them and scavenge them. You know, nature is very capricious. So anyways, so this is kind of like that, right? If the plant isn't being beleaguered by the spider mites, then there's more plants for the caterpillars. See, they're not on a evil hell-bent mission to rob you of your plants. What they're trying to do is just eat and survive. And if they could do it with less food, or if they could have more food available, then that's going to be better for them. And so traits that get adapted to this. And similar to the spider mites, same thing. They have evolved to avoid them. The ones that don't avoid them, well, maybe they don't pass on as much as the other ones. So over time, the things that allow them to do this sort of a thing become, more common in the overall population. So that's just sort of an interesting thing. That's basically it in a nutshell, to be honest. And so down here we have some.
Any applications of this? Any way we could like sort of deploy caterpillars to ward off spider mites in our gardens? Is there any? I mean, obviously, there's downsides to that.
Particularly in a deconstructed way, yeah. You could not have them be alive. You could, in fact, change them from a solid to a liquid, and maybe you would be able to do something like with a crude extract.
Okay, yeah. So being aware that they were going to avoid that, so you could spray the plants with something that they'll avoid.
Yeah. So and I do want to bring it up that I very thoroughly looked through this paper. I didn't find them saying exactly what substance. I was very curious. I would definitely have shared that. And also how. So it seems like their use of the word trace is very appropriate here. You know, it's probably something from the frass, the spider mite fecal matter. There's probably other excretions that happen on such a sort of a micrological scale that we're not really, able to sort of visually or detect otherwise. But it's there, and apparently it lasts for a few days, and that's not very long. And, in my experience, products that are described as like repellents are typically not very effective. And I'm not talking about like for like mosquitoes or ticks or things like this. I mean, in agricultural sense.
Right.
And that's usually because it's way more, it's like, it's like a martial arts match. Like, why would you start with your weakest attack? Like, this isn't a TV show. Like you go for the win, you want to use the most effective, best thing. And usually that's going to be something that's going to be lethal, not something that's just going to ward them away, because they'll just come back. Right. So I just I see it a lot, and I just want
I
to
mean,
address that.
I guess there might be a bioresistance argument to use a repellent instead of a lethal thing.
That's a
The
really good
idea
point.
of the pest population may not develop resistance as quickly, or it may still be in their interest to practice the avoidance behavior where you can more selective, you'd be selecting for resistance to the lethal measure. I mean, that's happened a lot, right? Where things that used to be lethal, the pests are no longer bothered by.
Absolutely. And sometimes it only takes a few seasons or a couple of years. I remember a resistance scare for a compound used for powdery mildew in Gerbera. And they sent their chemists down. They're like, hey, let's take this really seriously and take some samples. And it wasn't. It was because the sprayers didn't spray very well. But they took it seriously.
Yeah. I mean, disease resistance could be really bad to some of those things. So, and that's always been one of the concerns with some of the ways that they use, genetically modified pesticides, like the BT crops, that whether that was just going to sort of such broad scale use of it was going to basically be breeding for resistance.
Definitely. And also with the repellent too, a lot of people who know about these sort of interactions know that plants can release some volatiles that will attract some predators and other sorts of, will essentially be net good guys for the plant. But these predators, these parasites, these organisms, they can become desensitized in this cacophony of volatiles. We can detect what we can detect, but it's certainly not the full range of things going on aromatically and otherwise chemically. So like that's another reason why a repellent is just kind of like not very useful. Like it's got a lot of it's just not very persistent, not very penetrative, not very, like you're saying. But even with things that are lethal, you still you want to use them well. And to that point,
right.
I know that some places will argue to use a crop that is not, in the case of like GMO, for example, that they aren't that way, or simply if you're using for pesticide resistance, just not spray certain parts of your field, which sounds really crazy to some
the regions of refuge. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It does seem kind of crazy to be a farmer that's growing crops for the insects that you don't want.
I know, right? But it's kind
I've
of
talked to farmers about that. They're like, this is nuts. I mean, yeah, you want me to grow a whole row of crops just for the bad insects that we're trying to kill.
I know it's so, but really you're playing like ecologists, like you're playing like a creative role, and that's kind of where I find it's sort of
a lot of them like to just play farmer, I think.
Yeah, sometimes you do. But when you think about the effect on sort of from an evolutionary perspective, from like a population's perspective, a repellent, the organisms that are successfully evaded with that repellent can go on to reproduce the next generation. But
exactly
with a pesticide, the organisms that are successfully evaded by that don't go on to create the next generation. So it really quickly sort of selects for resistance to that in a way that repellents are more sort of, have potential to have a longer term effect before anything like that could develop, because it's in.
I think they would be, I think you could use them as like, I think that the best use of something like this, I've seen like capsaicin oil as by independently, but also in tandem with other products for some insects, and I guess other pests potentially. You can use this as like almost like tear gas is used as like a motivator to move into another location from the place that it's applied to, and that can make them more vulnerable, especially if they like to hide out in little nooks and crannies. And so maybe it increases the effective coverage. So in that way, I could see how a repellent could maybe be a disruptor. But like you say, independently, just doesn't make sense from all scales, from genetic to ecological, right?
Brandon Russ jumped in about 5 or 10 minutes ago, and he's been quietly waiting to get introduced. And I remember he's had a few stories in the past, if I'm remembering correctly. I think it might be specifically with spider mites, about how maybe him or some of his buddies in the pre-legalization days were growing, and they used some chemicals on spider mites, and they killed off the majority of them, but the ones that were kept alive were like kind of super spider mites, if I'm remembering correctly. But Brandon, welcome in. Let the people know where they can find you in. share a little bit about those experiences.
Sure. My name's Brandon Rust. You can find me on Instagram at rust.brandon. Make sure that you're following the right account because there's lots of scammers. And you can also check out Bokashi Earthworks, bokashiearthworks.com for all your microbes, amendments, fertilizers. And we are still having our 25% off sale until Tuesday. Yeah, so I've never really had a issue with spider mites in cultivation. Luckily, my whole career, I've never had an infestation. But I have seen instances where people make basically super mites, where they will use chemical insecticides continuously, and not in the proper manner that they're supposed to be utilized, and so they are not able to eliminate the problem. And what ends up happening is the insects seem to build immunity to these types of poisons over longer periods of time, and to the point where nothing is really effective, even when the products are being applied properly.
Oh yeah. There's also this effect like hormolygosis, where something that's supposed to be lethal isn't, and quickly increases things like fecundity or reproductive rate and that kind of stuff. And spider mites are better at it than a lot of other herbivorous arthropods.
Yeah. In my experience, spider mites are pretty easy to get rid of if you're already doing your maintenance. The things I have only ever seen other people's gardens get greatly out of control from just extreme neglect. I mean, because
I agree with that.
It is one of those things where you can physically see them. I could understand if you were having something like hemp russet mite, which takes extreme magnification to be able to see them, and then you need to know where on the plant to be looking at, and then you need to be knowing what you're actually looking for. So it can be difficult, but when you're talking about an insect that you can visually see with your eye, when it comes down to it, that's just neglect, and spider mites are really easy to get rid of. There are so many options, from horticultural oils, there's wettable sulfur, there's beneficial insects, there's essential oils, there's alcohol products, there's like the list goes on. And physical removal, even just spraying down your plant can spray them off, if you're in an outdoor setting and stuff. So there's a lot of things that can be done, and it's really just I guess not taking proper precautions.
I got to push back on this, man. It's like the fourth time you've basically dragged growers over the coals for getting spider mites. I don't think it's necessarily their faults. I know a lot of growers that end up with spider mites that then have to struggle.
I think
quite
when it gets really bad.
Yeah, I'm talking about like full-blown outbreaks, like when you
right.
the types of stuff.
I understand, but even before that point, it can be a battle to get back from them. I mean, even if you're trying to do, it depends on what size operation you're in, and it depends on sort of how dense your plants are, what stage of growth they're at. A lot of things can make the battle with spider mites pretty profound. So
if they're already
it's not the toughest, but it's not sort of like, if you can't manage this, you're an idiot thing either. So I just want to
definitely agree with that.
I got some clones from a nursery, and I'm convinced that they were already being treated with some of the things that I had used. I tried sulfur, I tried the Amazing Dr. Zymes, and I tried it was like an essential oil product from Humboldt. It smells really good. I can't think of the name of it right now. Lost Coast Plant Therapy. Tried all three of them in rotation, and I had them isolated. They were in a separate area. I never trust clones, especially when they're from a nursery. So this wasn't even the first time that I've gotten issues. So I was just like, all right, I kind of treat them all like they're infected already, and put them through the process. And they still, with all three of those things, like every couple of days, they still got to the point of making webs. And it's just certain ones are a lot more Matthew said fecundity. I think the temperature really plays a big role in that. So the amount that they can breed and reproduce, if it's hot and humid, and the ideal environment for like your grow, it's also oftentimes the ideal environment for spider mites to reproduce.
And on top of that, like there's a seasonality to it for a lot of people, or for a lot of places rather. Like I would say, like for example, I would agree that when I've encountered it where somebody has got like the silk is like over the leaves. Like spider mice will make silk under the leaves, like as little nests, and that sort of a thing. And actually, I'm going to. Oh, did you take it away? Good. But like they'll tell me to my face, look me in the eye, and say, "Oh, I look at these plants all the time." No, dude, this was maybe more than a month of like unchallenged problem. However, getting spider mites and also having a persistent population, I often call it a persistent low pressure situation. That's super common, all kinds of crops, and
Just
also
they're an
cannabis.
annoying enough to cause a
Yeah.
problem, especially with the early clone that was
Yeah.
I got the clone, it was told it was clean, like I'm always told that, right? And then so I put it into my little quarantine area and I treated it and I was just like, you know what, man, it's not even worth the fucking effort. They were so resistant and it was causing me so much stress, and I had good healthy seeds growing in a chamber next to it. I'm like, I'm just gonna kill these and toss them. Fuck it.
Yeah,
I've got a bunch of other shit going on, and I didn't need them. It was like I was curious about it. It was an option to check out, and it showed me who that person was and not to trust them, and not to
They're
say
pernicious.
yeah,
They're pernicious spider mites. Well,
it can happen at any clone dispensary or whatever. But I'll say this: I've gotten clones twice from friends that are home growers, and they're clean. I got clones twice from nurseries here in San Diego, and both times, once got root aphids, the other time I got the most resistant spider mites that I've ever seen, because I had fought spider mites literally that same year with my barber and took them out, no problem. Lost Coast plant therapy and followed up with some predators, and we wiped them out and had no issues. But it was different stages of growth and things like that. But just the point to be made, I guess, always quarantine your clones, no matter where you're getting. I don't care if it's from your mom or your best friend. It's always a good idea to set them in a separate area and grow them out for a few weeks until you can really check them and check them their whole entire time. A lot of people like Spartan, I think, would recommend to even hit them with sulfur right off the bat. Like you can sulfur dunk them or sulfur them right when they go into the quarantine area, just as a basic start, because it's going to probably benefit the plant and prevent maybe some molds, mildews, and kills off a lot of common pests that you will see.
Yeah, they're very persistent. They're insidious in that way, and they feed on all 4,000. 4,000 was the grand champion amount of different species that spider mites in particular have been. So two-spot spider mites have been documented on.
Different species of plants is what you're saying? 4,000 different plants?
Exactly. 4,000, so like that's
I see them at Home Depot and Lowe's and shit all the time. Like you go into the
Oh,
succulent
yeah.
section and they have them
And
in
they've
there,
been
unfortunately.
exposed to all this bad stuff too, like the really nasty stuff that you shouldn't even be using in like cannabis, right? And so, over time, they have years of experience dealing with the really nasty stuff. So some of the stuff that we would even use nowadays could be less effective. And even if it's coming from a natural plant and that sort of a thing, and they suppress plant immune system, and yeah, they got a lot of tricks up their sleeves, more than most. I have a really in-depth presentation that we could go over if we need a topic, but I think
we have 3 questions and it is chat Q&A, so I want to
There we
definitely
go.
get to the questions that we've got loaded up. If people are interested, though, they should definitely check out Zenthanol's YouTube channel, because
I'll
I've
put it in
checked
the
out
chat.
those. And even before I had spider mites, I knew several options to fight them because I'd already watched it. I already knew what they looked like. I already knew what the stippling in the leaves looked like because I'd seen it. It's nice to be able to be like, oh, I've seen this already, and this is what it might be, and then be able to confirm it once you actually see a little bit more of the details and know exactly how to fight it, and not have to like rip your hair out and think like, oh, I have to burn my whole entire grow down. A lot of people will literally nuke their grow with toxic chemicals that they don't necessarily need to.
I've seen it.
There's a lot more reasonable responses, whether it's a predator mite or not so noxious pesticide like sulfur if you're in veg, for example, or some of the other things. Like I have tried Lost Coast plant therapy with success, combined with a follow-up of predators, and I think that the Amazing Dr. Zymes can also be good, but I don't think that either or any of them are 100% effective on their own. I think that usually a combination of things is going to be most effective, and reapplying when necessary, making sure that you're crop scouting and monitoring the population, seeing if it's actually going down, seeing when the things are effective and when they're not effective, and trying to at least get an understanding of where your grow is at, because what works for one might not work for others. And like Matthew's said in the past, like neem, for example, people will say like, oh, use neem or neem oil, but there's like 1,000 neem oils out there, and all of them have different levels of azadirachtin. All of them have different levels of maybe subtle amounts of pesticides or other things that are in there that you don't even know about. So be very careful with how you source your things, and realize that not every single product that has a certain name is the same. So there's definitely some due diligence when it comes to IPM.
Well said.
We have some questions though that I would like to get into, because I wrote chat Q&A on the thing, so I don't want to bait and switch the people.
Indeed.
They came, and Georgia Groguy was the first one who said, "Is there a good general insect ID and disease ID poster/chart you would recommend?" And that was aimed at Matthew.
Yeah, do you own a dictionary or a dictionary-like shelving? Because there's all kinds of things out there that you might be dealing with. And I think the best answer to that question is, you could check out some of the really big ones for cannabis on my YouTube channel or on the Future Cannabis Project, where I made presentations like that, the Zentanol IPM series. On top of that, there are books that you could buy. But the issue is that I don't know any specifically for cannabis. I don't know any examples that will probably be good for all parts of the world, right? Usually a lot of pest books like this tend to be geographically oriented. So like Southwest or Northeast North America or something like this. But there are definitely places that you can find website resources and things like that. It's been around enough that
Do you see that much in cannabis, Matthew? Are different cannabis farmers having different pest issues based on sort of, traditional agricultural zones, and maybe what other crops or pests might be growing around them? Do you see much regionality? I just haven't thought about that as specific as it is for a lot of other crops.
I see some of it, and I guess I'm being kind of provisional here, because that is a very good question to ask. Because the other thing that I like to say a lot, which I also find very valid, is that a lot of the pests typically of cannabis are really common agricultural pests. But again, saying that is, I'm really glossing over a lot when I say that, because different kinds of crops and all that.
Right.
I saw a leaf hopper the other day on the street. I was walking, I was like, I recognize this from Zentanol YouTube videos, but it's out here obviously on a non-cannabis crop. It was on the sidewalk.
Wild. Yeah.
It was on the sidewalk, funny
Yeah.
enough. I was like, holy shit, that's like a kind of a beautiful, larger bug. But
take it home with you.
I walked right past
Just give it a
I
name.
kept going.
But yeah, so spider mites, I think that mostly and there's a lot of info on all of the pests that exist already, and I think that a good amount, not all, can be extrapolated for cannabis. So I don't want to knock that. If you do have that experience, it's actually incredibly valuable. If you're somebody who farms or who's grown plants that are not cannabis, you'll have a lot of that that experience, which would be very helpful, very key. But I guess what I'm really trying to guard against is just a complacency, as always, because there's also going to be organisms that we don't typically see. For example, grasshoppers, for example, I feel are, and I don't have a lot of experience with them. So again, it's sort of provisional, but I do feel I don't really get that as much in California. Some, but I think it's much more common Midwest, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
worms.
Right. There are bigger pests there because of the agricultural crops that are grown out there in the first place, and sort of the proximity to a lot of people. And it makes sense. It's an interesting thought. So
non-cannabis pests are even different region to region. A lot of people are now in Thailand with the legalization happening over there. Even people here from the States, and I'm in touch with a couple of them. And I guess there are 20 different poisonous snakes over there. So when they're cultivating, they have to look out for more things than maybe some people around here would. And It's a different type of pest, but that could be, literally deadly. So something to consider. And I'm sure they have lots of different insects and things over there as well. So it's definitely challenging, because you might see a book that's titled with a fancy label cannabis ethnobotany and whatever, and it's got all these things. It says it's going to describe A to Z all plant pest and disease that can impact cannabis, but like Matthew is saying, a lot of the stuff is probably going to be regional, and it's good to know what is going to be most likely in your region. I've seen the non-cannabis pests become cannabis pests, and certain ones that you predicted that hadn't been seen on cannabis show up on cannabis later on. So it's only a matter of time, I guess, with certain pests that they will.
I want to shout out Brian 420 PM in the chat. I agree that the need is there, and I've basically tried to pitch this to Matthew before. we need a good guide that people can just come to and be like, that's the symptoms that I have. Okay, it's probably this pest. And it sounds like that's what people are looking for, some sort of insect ID. I know it's a big ask in a certain sense, but I definitely think that the interest is there from the community. And I think Matthew Gates would be like the perfect guy to try to put something like that together.
I appreciate the warm wishes, and I think that you are right. I have a document that I update with like new pest information, that sort of thing, that is available through my Patreon. But the thing about it is that I've made a lot of articles and I've written a lot about these things, and I think you're motivating me to really just collect that and a lot of additional work and really turn it into a good reference. I want to make sure that it would be up to my own standards. In some cases, the data just doesn't exist, and I can't be everywhere. But I do think that would be a really cool idea, especially with Dr. Coco. And I think we've talked about this too.
Yeah,
like
I'm
even
in. I'll help
having
you
like
get
a
it together.
yeah, and also and also, do you remember the map system? Oh, or the
Maps.
idea that we could have references like, oh, we found a lot of these pests, like not like something very specific.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, exactly. And have
bugworms in
people be
this
able to
area.
geolocate it.
Yeah, spider mites in this area, and we're seeing it, and marrying it with a lot of other
Northeast,
metric
Southwest,
data.
etc.
Yeah, report things in real time. That'd be cool.
I think that would be really, I would be incredibly stoked to work on.
We could work to that with developers too. That it sort of logs people that came that were searching for spider mites, and you could do that based on their IP service or IP address, what state they were in or what area they were in, whatever, for simple sort of geolocating things to be able to do some epidemiological stuff. Yeah, I think that would be interesting.
I'd love to see more of it.
So cool.
I see a base level in Humboldt and the Northern California counties. I follow a lot of growers up there, and they'll say, hey, I got my first spider mites, like heads up, get your predators ready, get your sprays ready. Like if you're on this side of the mountain, look out for thrips or look out for, whatever it is. So people are, at least in my opinion, like the people that are trying to help their community out are sharing that information and posting it as soon as they know. So
I think it'd be really interesting. And you definitely start to see things like everybody from a certain clone dispensary is getting spider mites. I mean, you'd see that pretty quickly. And that kind of epidemiological stuff that we don't often have access to. It would be great to have. I think you'd be able to recognize where problems were coming from in a way that we can't right now, whether that's sort of regionally or different pests coming through or whatever, or just different players, different actors in this space, like, a particular virus or pest coming out of a particular breeder.
Smoke Your Own ask a pertinent question. Does anyone know what happened to Dark Heart Nursery in Cali? Can't find them on the interweb anymore, which I haven't checked to follow that up, but they were pretty big. And if that is the case, then maybe they're in some legal issues, because now that plants are track and traceable, if they are selling plants that had hop latent viroid and they're damaging people's growth, they're legally accountable for lawsuits from the gardeners and cultivators, from my understanding, unless they signed contracts that said we're not accountable for that, or that they guaranteed plants that were clean or didn't have any claims on those types of things. I'm not a legal expert on this by any means, but I think that once you get into the legal business, if you're giving people plants and propagative material, if you do cause damages and things like that to their cultivation setting, then you might be able to be found liable, especially if they can trace it genetically through the clone stock. And especially if you're already known for it, they're unfortunately kind of known for spreading hop latent viroid and then trying to sell people the solution. Oh, the American one's jumping in. I will definitely let him in here. And
I am sitting in front of the website where it is letting me know that every year more than 400 licensed cultivators across California trust Dark Heart Nursery to start their crop cycle. So I guess they're still around. I had not heard this, so I'm curious what they meant.
Yeah, I'm curious. Smoke Your Own, if you could follow up, maybe you just weren't able to find them on the interweb, but we can get to the American One's introduction now that he is here with us live. Welcome, the American One.
Hello, Jack panel, everyone in chat. Sorry for my tardiness, but yes, I was stuck in the garden. I didn't even realize. So I'm glad to be here. I'm the American One, and good to see everybody.
Well, I feel like we had a little misunderstanding with the last question. So hopefully, Dark Heart Nursery, if they are still operating, is doing everything a little bit better nowadays. Because I knew that they did have issues with that, and that would have been my only thought if they had disappeared kind of overnight. That could have been one of the reasons, and kind of just a forewarning and thought for anybody who is putting clones out there to do your due diligence, because I do think that even if it hadn't happened yet, I think that people will be held accountable for these types of things. And I think I saw Doc nodding his head earlier when I was just talking about like
Yeah.
agriculture in general, that when you do that type of thing, and Matthew knows as well, whether it's like an illegal pesticide that was sprayed on something or actual pathogen or pest, you can be held accountable for selling somebody material that is not up to the standard that it's supposed to be.
And here's the thing that a lot of cannabis growers don't think about, and I don't want to, be a Debbie Downer, but like you're not the only crop. And there are, like I just said, right, lots of pests are pests of cannabis and many other things. And some of those are quarantine pests that if they get into a place, like we talked a few sessions ago about hop powder mildew, they had to do a lot to get rid of it, and they control the movement of hop into that state, and for that reason. So I wouldn't be surprised if similar restrictions occur with cannabis potentially, if there is such a conflation. And I believe there might be.
Good point. We had a question for Dr. MJ. I'm not sure if you answered it in the chat, but I always love to answer them for the podcast. Earlier, Artman asked Dr. Coco, if one uses frequent fertigation like I do 24 times a day, do you think the EC should be lowered? I had some leaf burn.
First of all, 24 times a day is a lot. It's like really a lot. I'm sort of tempted to think that you're probably doing it once an hour, like every hour, which isn't ideal in terms of the distribution of water. Plants under high frequency fertigation, they do need to be watered during the lights out, but not as frequently as you're watering during the lights on. So if you are just sort of powering through, if anything, you're sort of overwatering during lights off. I mean, I'd be curious as to what size pots these are in. I imagine pretty small pots, and certainly the smaller pot would justify the higher frequency. But no, to get at your base question, which is, should you lower the EC because you're watering more frequently? No, you're not actually giving more water to the plants. You're just giving it more frequently. The actual amount of water that it's able to be held in the media isn't really going to change. The actual amount of water that the plant's going to take up really isn't going to be able to change. You might be ending up with sort of excessive runoff, but other than that, whether you're watering once a day or whether you're watering 24 times a day, you're going to be watering about the same amount of water. So there's no reason to sort of reduce the electrical conductivity. I mean, if the EC is too high to begin with, that's a thing, but I assume that it's not coming from Artman. So no, Artman, I would look at something else. Maybe if it was a really small container, any kind of dry back might have done that. There might be other things. It sounds like you're pushing at some limits. And I would just say, I don't necessarily think 24 times a day is necessary, but you get good growth. That's a lot, though.
I think thoroughly answered. Does anybody else have any thoughts there for Artman?
Not I.
I think Doc thoroughly covered it. I think just to reference like what you are personally doing, if I remember correctly, I think you were doing like something like 5 times a day or something like that.
Yeah, and I'll go higher than that. When I do the party cup grows, I try to go higher than that. I'll do like 12 times a day or something. The frequency is twice as high during the lights on period as it is during the lights off period, though. So, if it's 3 hours in between events when lights are on, it'll be 6 hours in between events when lights are off. If you end up just going on a consistent basis, like every hour like that, you just end up with excessive runoff during the dark period. it's not gonna necessarily hurt the plant. I assume Artman is growing in cocoa with perlite, reasonable size containers. He's potting up. He's growing healthy plants. He's a cocoa for cannabis regular. So I'm sort of taking some of those things for granted in answering this question.
I think it's always good just to go through the important kind of
Yeah.
steps of the process for the growers out there who maybe aren't on cocoa for cannabis yet. If you're growing in cocoa, definitely check it out. And even if you're not, go over there and check it out because they have grow alongs for all different types of cultivation, whether it's plant training or different mediums. And sometimes they even do like lots of everybody grows the same seed and things like that. So lots of fun to be had over there and great information as well. So definitely check out cocoaforcannabis.com.
Thank you for that plug. Absolutely.
It's worth going to. I see a lot of growers growing fire on there.
What's that?
Something about the recipe. I see a lot of people growing really fire plants over there. So, and you do like I think weekly plants of the week from Cocoa for Cannabis.
Yeah, we have
on
photos
Instagram and stuff. And it shows that there's a lot of people that know what they're doing and following that recipe are getting good results. So if people are not having those results, maybe moving towards more of a system like somebody else is doing. Because like you were saying, solo cup 12 times a day. Solo cup, I think, is usually the smallest people are going to grow in. So doubling that with the 24 times a day, I think he's probably doing, like you're saying, maybe just out of convenience, maybe his timer is the convenience is to do it every hour. And like you're saying, during lights off, it's essentially going to be twice as wet because the light isn't on to help the plants uptake the water or evaporate any of it. So things like that. It's not like in cocoa you're going to get soggy roots or anything, but I think that it's just maybe excess water usage.
I'm reading his chat and he's saying it's not cocoa. Sorry, Artman. It's a large RCDW tray. So in DWC?
Reverse DWC. So
recirculating.
Yeah. So I guess when he says feeding it 24 times a day, he's exchanging the water 24 times a day.
Yeah, I'm very confused about what that would mean exactly.
So with like RDWC, there's like essentially
the C is just connected in the wrong place. That's my problem with that. I'm going to assume that's a typo. Okay, RDWC.
Yeah, so essentially like there's a bunch of brands out there that have these. Current Culture H2, I think, is probably one of the better ones. And there's like Growrilla, which is like more affordable. It's like a bunch of 5-gallon buckets that are connected with like plumbing, piping, and tubing. And essentially you've got the plants in buckets, and then you've got a reservoir separately.
Right.
And they have pipes that run a solution from plant to plant to plant back to a res, and they're exchanging water at a certain.
Exactly. So even more so, no. I mean, and that is kind of the answer. Like DWC can actually tolerate higher electrical conductivity than cocoa. And it's nothing to do with it being like less frequent. The roots are always exposed to the water. And in RDWC, the same basic system. You don't have to lower the EC because the roots are getting it more frequently. You just want to sort of keep it in the right range where they can absorb it. And if you've done that, I would look at just other issues for what caused your tip burn or your leaf issue that was causing this in the first place.
That's a good point because DWC can definitely run higher EC without having much issue. So it might be like crazy enough lack of nutrient or some other cause, like maybe pH is off. In DWC, if things get out of whack, temperature, if the water is too warm.
Temperature. Yeah, I'd look at temperature or aeration right away. Nutrient element ratio drift. So any recirculating system, the nutrient element ratio, so not just the NPK, but the NPK, Ca, Mg, Si, all of the ratio of all the elements is going to change each successive sort of pass through the plants, basically. And sometimes that can drift out, or things can even accumulate, not probably in this system, that they can cause symptoms. So there's other issues, not just EC. I would look, more at temperature, O2, and NER.
Good points. And I think we definitely did a good job addressing that question. And we've got a bunch from Oil Town Oil, but let's see, I think we had one before him, and it was about hash from the Bala Net. Probably mispronouncing that. At Cheap Home Grow. Question: used pressed hash pucks if using it to spice up can of butter? Do you remove the micron bag or do you cook it as is? Should I be worried about the plastic in the butter from the bag? Cheers. So, personally, I would try and use a bag that you're not worried about plastic being in. I think a lot of them are like fabric, like a silk or something that wouldn't be bad to cook at a certain temperature. I look at like Rosin Evolution. A lot of their products are food safe, food grade, so you wouldn't have to worry about it. Depending on where you're getting your bags from, the micron bags, I would just confirm that they don't have plastic. If you're worried about plastic, I take the puck out before putting it in the butter. The other thing you could do is like soak it in either oil, like vegetable oil, coconut oil, or alcohol, and make like an RSO from it. I know Spartan Grown in the past has mentioned that some of his favorite RSO came from soaking the pressed pucks from people that made essentially flour rosin. You're left over with all these little pucks essentially, and they're kind of like, some people even eat them. They're like decarbed, so you can eat it, and it's kind of like crispy, and definitely has a herb taste or whatever. People will crunch it up and put it on top of food and things like that. But there's a lot of things that can be done with it. I'm curious if the rest of the panel has thoughts on what to do with the leftover little pressed flour pucks when you're making hash rosin or flour rosin.
I feel like Spartan would have had
Yeah,
great
Spartan was
comment.
the man for that one. But I had never had a press. But yeah, I think everything you said is pretty spot on. But food safe doesn't mean melting safe, which might be an issue, but I don't think so either.
Well, food safe is like turkey
Uh,
bags, for example. They can go to like cooking temperature. You can get it up to 400
Right.
degrees to cook a turkey. So as long as you're cooking a butter at like a food temperature, if you're using a turkey bag or whatever, like with that, it's going to be safe, like sous vide or whatever. There's a bunch of different ways to
Right.
infuse cannabis product, getting it to a temperature, but you don't want to use like plastic that has BPA in it, for example. Like that's just not going to be healthy at all, and it shouldn't be in your
Right.
product
Right.
from the first place. But yeah, definitely look at where you sourced your rosin press bags from and see what they're made from. And if you can separate it, it might be too difficult, it sounds like, to separate it. If maybe that's why you're asking, if you can just cook it to make it simpler. But yeah, Spartans, I've remembered in the past, he said he would get like a full bag, like a gallon bag, freezer bag, and then just fill it full of alcohol with the pucks in there, and then essentially drain it off and make RSO with that. And he said it was always very high quality, and people would, for a while, it was like how people threw out trim before they realized they can make hash with it. And certain people, I mean, there's people making hash with trim for hundreds or thousands of years, right? Depending on where you're at. But a lot of modern cultivators are throwing away their trim before they realized they could make good hash with it. And I think the same thing was being done with these little rosin pucks. When people pressed their flour, got the rosin out, they're like, well, it's done, it's spent. They already got their use out of it. And they weren't thinking, oh, I could get every little last drop out of that plant. And some people are trying to squeeze everything out of it. So props to you, I guess, for being resourceful and getting those last little bits out of it. And with that said, I think we've got a bunch of questions from Oil Town Oil that I'd like to get to before we can maybe share the link in about 10, 12 minutes to see if we want anybody to jump in and show off their gardens and ask some questions live. But Oil Town Oil says, any advice for drying? And all of their questions are pretty drying related. So we could go a lot of ways with this, but I'll go around the panel and just get quick tips. So any advice for drying? Airflow, smell, or quality problems? We'll start with a box in my bedroom, 55 F, so 55 Fahrenheit, and 69 RH. Then move back to the tent once all the plants are harvested. And then they follow up and they say, oops, I clicked and it scrolled. Okay. Will ceiling fan in my bedroom be enough airflow to circulate through a drying box? And how much airflow should I have drying? I personally would start off and say, I don't think that a ceiling fan above a drying box is going to be enough. I'd worry a little bit about mold or mildew. It depends on your base RH. It sounds like 69%, which is pretty high. And if you're packing the plants in there pretty tight, that's kind of a recipe for disaster. I'd want more airflow. I'd want like a box fan on the floor or something, shooting air through there. I'd rather air on the side of a little bit more airflow than less. I know a lot of people are like, oh, you're going to over dry it and dry it too fast, and that's going to lead to hay. I've used the herbs now for my last like 10 harvests, and for the 6 of in a row, I did it versus 60 degrees and 60% relative humidity in my curador, and I did it versus my hang dry in my tent, which was like anywhere but like around 70 degrees and like 55 to 65 RH. And every single time, the herbs now had the best dried bud, and that's roughly 70 to 75 degrees. and the RH is 55 to 65, but there's constant airflow, like way more airflow than I've ever seen recommended anywhere else. And with that, after it's dried, I jar it, and a week later, it's like perfectly cured. But that being said, a lot of people aren't comfortable with that amount of airflow. But that also said, when he's done terpene tests, he'll get like 6% with his Herbs Now device, Scott from Herbs Now, and then he put in 60% relative humidity for 2 weeks, and he got like 4.5%. So there was a difference in terpenes, but there's been independent people who found the same as him. There's been independent people who found different, where like they saw a little bit of a drop in terpenes versus the hang dry. So I think it really depends on the nug that you test. I think the best way to do it would be maybe that one device that doesn't actually destroy the sample. So you could test the same exact nug and see like the differences between it in different conditions, I guess. But you wouldn't be able to dry the same nug 2 different ways.
Yeah.
So I guess.
How do you try the same nug twice, Jack?
Yeah, that was my I was like, wait, but from the same branch, I guess would be the thought. But even then, like,
Or even just the same plant.
You want like the branch that has like, you know, how each side of the stem there's like a sister bud.
Yeah.
It's like left and right.
Copies, yeah.
So like you get the top bud and you split that right down the middle. You could even like take a knife and section up portions of the bud and dry it different ways. But I don't know. I think it'd be fun to get scientific with it and actually see. But just in my personal experience, I don't think that having too much airflow is going to harm you. I do think that having not enough airflow will harm you. If you get it into a jar, I have a meter. So if it gets, here's my caveat, you don't want to over dry it. So I have a meter and I check constantly. If it gets below 12% moisture content, I have a wood moisture meter that sticks a metal pin into the bud. And as soon as I get to 12%, I jar it. If it goes below that, like 10% and under, it feels like really dry. The dispensary bud is usually like 3 to 5%. It turns into like dust powder. 5 to 10%, it's still pretty dry. Like 10 to 12%, it's got that nice stickiness to it. Anything above like 12, I'm not comfortable putting it into a jar personally. But
I had a long talk with the Canitrol people. They were saying that they thought it was more about like water activity than the moisture percentage per se, but their range was, I think like 10 to 13% for different cultivars based on sort of moisture activity within the bud. You know, I think the danger with too much airflow is excessive drying. I don't think that you really have too much risk if you're going to be at 55 F, 69 RH. But I think that's risky. I think Jack was onto this too. Like it's risky to dry it that slow. Like that's really cold and pretty humid for drying. So you know, what's the VPD at 55 and 69? I mean, it's going to be vanishingly small. So
it sounds right. Yeah.
And when the VPD is small, it means that there's not a lot of room for the air to evaporate moisture to add more moisture to it, which is what we're hoping that we do. So just to sort of be aware of that. I think if you could control one of those, I'd bring the RH down towards 60. Being up towards 70 when you're that cold just seems dangerous to me, even with good airflow. A lot of growers that I end up talking to are at either drier in their RH or warmer in their temperature, or usually both. And for those growers, I just want to reiterate, you know, too much air movement certainly can be problematic because your buds are already probably drying faster than ideal. A lot of people can't get to, you know, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, you know, or even into the low 60s. And, you know, they might be at like 40% humidity or something. And that's just sort of where they're at for their environment. And they don't have a lot of control over that. In that situation, air movement needs to be sort of really closely guarded. I guess my argument in a lot of cases, in your case, I'd want excessive air movement to ward off potential danger, but you basically need enough air movement that you don't get microclimates developing, that, you know, the relative humidity and the temperature are pretty well distributed throughout the entire space. So you don't have areas of high humidity right around the buds and areas of heat higher in the room and areas that are colder lower in the room and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'd say when you first chop it too, you could let it be a little bit out of range more, let it dry faster, I would think, without hurting a lot. If you don't get
Yeah.
crazy, and once you get past that point where you're not so fearful of bud rot, you could uh you know dial it in even better.
Yeah.
But yeah, 55 is kind of like, people say 60 and 60. I've been close a bunch of times. I think, yes, I think slow is all right, though. Slow is good. But I think, especially when you first chop them, it doesn't hurt to get them drier quicker. I think even Spartan was preaching that at one point, let it, the first 2 days or something, let it get dry. And then
He sets his
a
RH.
little more.
Yeah, I practice
Yeah,
that too.
RH.
Drop it out of the danger
RH,
zone quickly. That first
It's like
couple of
50
days
or
when you're in the
55.
danger zone, right? Get the bulk
Yep,
of the humidity out
yeah.
there quickly, and then slow it way down. Take a
Yep,
lot
yep.
more time with that latter part of the dry. I mean, the plants sort of do that naturally, right? They lose a bunch of their moisture in the beginning, but that's definitely what we want to plan. I agree.
Yeah, it's like people lose weight. The fat ones lose weight quick at the beginning, and then it gets harder and harder as they get skinnier. So yeah.
I'll say this. A lot of people, I think, go into jars too soon, and that causes issues for them with smells, where they start to get like haze and mildewy and nasty smells coming
You
around.
should be, if you're testing your RH in the jars, you should be able to know that you've gone in too soon pretty quickly. And to the feel too, because the outside of the buds will be dry when you're hanging, but if you've gone into the jars too quickly, like an hour after you put them into the jars, the buds will be all wet again, basically, right? Because there is a lot of moisture in the middle of the bud.
I think sometimes when it's subtle, when it's like right on the brink, where if they don't have the RH meter, it's just a little crispy on the outside, but the inside still has enough moisture that when they fill that jar up 100% instead of like 75% and leaving a little bit of air, room to like roll them around and burp it and move it out. I think you'll get those, and this has happened to me, that one bud, your biggest bud in the whole entire jar, has a touch of botrytis right in the center when you're cracking it open. And it's like, fuck. But it could be in more of the jar that you just don't visually realize it. But it could taint an entire jar really quickly. So my general tendency is to recommend what Doc said, check your RH diligently. A lot of people, unfortunately, though, like myself, I'll get stuff into jars, and I've gotten into the habit of I won't get it into a jar until I know for sure it can be in a jar for 12 to 24 hours without me having to pop it. Because if I don't do that, there might be a period of time where I go to work, I have to take care of things, and I can't get to the jar, and I get back, and if it's too moist going in, then you could shoot yourself in the foot a little bit.
But I'd rather get it into jars than not go too far on the dry side too. I mean, it's a tough battle, I think. I mean,
have you ever reintroduced
since I changed
moisture?
to dry trimming, though, I will say that I just go into jars right after I trim now. And I feel that if the bud's dry enough to trim, it's dry enough to go into the jars. At least that's been the case so far.
Yeah, if you don't overshoot too far on the dry, you could get re-moisture, if you don't get it to that ridiculous spot. And yeah, I've had issues where I had a piece that was too dry. I tried re-moistening it. I put it in the jar, put the lid on it, and I had to come back to that mold, and it was that sucked.
So
but yeah,
I know
so
Doc has
you got to
recommended
keep an eye on it when it's in the jar like that, especially. Yeah,
Keep your eyes on it. The first couple of days will be taken.
But for
until you can
rehydrating,
trust the RH reading.
they make these little terracotta stones, like Raw, the brand that makes the papers, it's called a raw hydro stone, but it's just a piece of terracotta, like a pot, and you soak that and you drop it into the jar, and that's how they used to rehydrate tobacco back in the day. And it actually, I've had some bud that I didn't grow myself. It was from a dispensary or whoever, sample my wife got, and then I introduced one of those hydro stones to it, and it went from like powdering up and like really dusty and undesirable to hydrostone, threw it in the curador at 60 degrees, 60% relative humidity, checked on it in a day and pulled the stone out, and the buds were relatively moistened back up to the point where they're more pleasant to grind and roll. And I even think it like brings out a little bit more of the flavor when it's kept at proper temperature and humidity. I've noticed I stick stuff in that curador 60, and I don't think that's the magic number for drying personally, but I do think that is a magic number for curing. I think if you could keep stuff at that long term, that is like perfect. Like I've seen every single bud that I put in there, and when I get it, it almost always gets better. Like 95% of the time, it's like almost never that it's better when I get it fresh from wherever, even from like my home grow. I pull it out of the herbs now, put it into the curador for a week, and 1 week later, it's like much better than when it was when I put it in. It just gets everything back to that kind of homogeneous zone. And even when I did my hang dry, or even when I dried the whole entire plant, like I cut down a plant, cleared the curador out, and hung the whole plant in there 60-60. And I think slowing it down, something about terpenes, they're weird. I think like you want to dry it relatively, not like super fast. I'm not talking like 24 hours or 48 hours, but like 5 to 10 days, maybe 15 at the most, and then get it into a jar. And because terpenes, if you look at any testing chart, they go from up here 100% and they slowly drift down, down, down as the time goes. Like unless you're keeping it in cold storage, out of oxygen exposure, out of light exposure, and not contacting it with your hands and things like that. I think glass jars are much better than, like, for example, Mylar or whatever else things cannabis are being put into, plastic bags. Yeah, so it's not moving around, like a glass jar that actually fits it. So it's not, you want to have a little bit of room to breathe, but not so much that the buds are like rocking around and banging off the sides of the walls, losing trichomes. Because you'll open up that jar and there will literally be trichomes frosting out your whole glass. It's like that's trikes that you could have smoked if you were a little bit more gentle, I guess. And just general thoughts. I'm curious, Brandon, do you have general thoughts on the amount of airflow and dry process? I know you've gone from home grow to much larger commercial grows, and I'd love to hear your input on this.
Yeah, so you want to have air movement, but you don't need air directly blowing on the plants. You just kind of want to create, movement. And then I just run nice and cool temperatures and nice low RH. So, if you can get to like 60, 65 in temps, do real slide dry. If you have a ton of biomass in a small room, I recommend keeping the RH a little bit lower for the first few days, but then you can readjust it. If everything's nice and spaced out, even you got plenty of room, 50%, 55% RH is pretty good.
The American one, did you have any thoughts on temperatures, humidities, and how long you like to dry, or when you like to get in jars? Any thoughts on that whole process?
No, pretty much what was said. And yeah, I like kind of Dr. MJ Coco's. If you're you should know when you're either dry trimming it or bucking it from the stems, whether it's ready for the jar or not. And like, yeah, check it though, especially if you have some big ones. You can put it in there, it'll feel nice and dry on the outside, put it in a jar overnight, and then you'll notice it's really wet again. And
yeah,
so check it. Keep an eye on that shit.
One of the things I would like to bring up, and it's one of the things that I think there's maybe a lot of misconception around, especially with new growers. I have seen a lot of people who's like never cultivated and never really dried before. They'll take their weed when it's still wet and they'll put it in a jar and they'll do this burping thing where they're like letting it burp and then drying it. And it's like, that's not the proper way. Like, you should never be putting anything in its final package until you're absolutely 100% sure that it's dry. And that what'll happen is you put it in there, thinking it's dry, you put the lid on there, the moisture redistributes from the inside of the product. And then all of a sudden you've just, you ruined your weed because you just put it into an environment with 100% moisture. And so the actual curing, which is the drying process, shouldn't be done in jars, in my opinion. It should be done on the line, and then the jars are the final part where you kind of store everything.
Yeah.
And then if need be, you need to escape that last little bit of moisture to get the kind of perfect consistency that you want. Then you can crack those lids if you need to. For a little bit, but you also have to realize if you crack that lid and it's 75% RH where you're at, you could be essentially letting more humidity back into that.
Or on the opposite, like in
ways.
Arizona, when it's dry as hell, you pop it
Yep.
open and it dries the bud right out. Like I brought some perfectly cured bud, hypothetically, allegedly longer than the statute of limitations ago, from California to Arizona, and it was perfectly cured in California. And then you get to Tucson and you open up that jar and it immediately just drops, like
And
it
it's
halves the
it's
relative
it's the
humidity.
opposite of that in Hawaii. You go to Hawaii, you bring weed that's perfectly cured, you open it up, and bam, that stuff is never going to dry out again.
It's wet. It's crazy. The environments. Florida's like that too. When it's that season where the humidity is just super high. If you're outdoors, like, and you open up a jar, it just turns everything that you had into, now it's overly moist bud, because the RH is like 100%, and it could be 100% and 100%, 100 degrees Fahrenheit there, which is rough outside in
I
Florida.
want to
when it's
bring
100
something
and
up
100.
just to reiterate this point, because I've heard a lot of growers think that there's something that gases off of cannabis that we need to burp out of the jar, or that there's, like ethylene gas or something like that. There really isn't. Like, everything that's gassing off of the cannabis is stuff that we want. It's like the terpenes volatilizing. It's not like something's breaking down like ripening gas and making it like ripening.
What about like
faster.
chlorophyll? Like getting rid of like the chlorophyll, like that early fresh cut green smell. I feel like if you smoked it like the day it was harvested, hypothetically.
Well, yeah, but it's not
with a freeze
dry
dryer.
yet. Like, that'll break down as it's drying.
Well, we have some
Um,
questions about freeze drying and drying with freezing technology, which in my experience, people who freeze dries buds, that's actually one of the drawbacks is if you freeze dry it, the chlorophyll is captured in there.
Yep.
So you get that green taste. And on
Yep.
top of that, it takes out 100% of the moisture. So the bud turns to a powder. Like
Yep.
it looks like a perfectly live bud, but you could like take it in your hand and squish it and it would
Yep.
come out like sand.
Yeah, like freeze-dried ice cream or something, right? Yeah, no, I think that most of the chlorophyll is going to gas off during the drying process. If you're still dealing with that, I think you're dealing with something like Brandon's talking about. You're still drying in the jars, and that's not great.
I think a lot of new growers are doing that unintentionally and being
Right.
told that they should burp based on some old books and bad technology and bad
yeah,
websites
based
on the
on
internet.
sort of myths. There's not good sort of science. I mean, if you were dealing with like apples, then you need to have ventilation for them. And I think it comes from like that, like the idea of like, transporting freshly harvested apples need to be basically burped or carried in a bag that has holes in it or whatever, so that the ethylene gas doesn't build up inside the bag and cause them to ripen faster. There's no sort of analogous process in cannabis. And even if there was like some things volatilizing that chlorophyll, I don't think you need to consistently burp to get rid of that concentration of sort of chlorophyll.
And I think that chlorophyll just, it breaks down internally. I'm not sure if it's volatilizing off as a
Yeah,
gas.
it's not volatilizing off, I don't think, really.
That's
right?
what I
I
was
don't
gonna
think so.
say. Yeah, but it's like it's that there are those like grassy aromas.
Right.
that's-
There's
And,
probably
that's
other
because
chemicals in there that are associated with like the fresh cut grass smell that we're all
If
familiar
you've
with.
got
and it might
that
not be
grassy
chlorophyll.
smell, though, it's because you messed up in a step. Because
Yeah.
that,
Well, yeah,
that
yeah.
it's if it has come to that, it's because you've already messed up. Now, I've seen it to where it's product has started to get that, and where they've been, and someone has like, oh, we need to make sure this is dry, put it back in the dry room, something like
Yeah,
that.
you need to dry
It's just-
again.
It's just it's
Or
that's
if
the
it's
hardest
dry,
part, man.
people-
Hardest part, because you can grow the best cannabis and then fuck your dry up and just completely ruin it.
Yep. So true. We have some more questions from the chat that I'd like to throw out there because I think we kind of all touched on those last few ones from.
I think time alone might ditch some of that chlorophyll.
Agreed.
Because I had one, I think it was the strain more than my well, it could have been because it was airy buds, but it was a little green tasting, and
High
since
nitrogen
I
will do
wasn't
that
loving
too.
on it, I left it in the jar and on the shelf for a long time, and it definitely eased out and tasted way better when I found it later. But that's anecdotal at best.
No, I've had that same experience, and I know newer growers. I think oftentimes when you give too much nitrogen, like that green taste tends to stick around a little bit more, and often tends to lead to hay smell, whether it's genetic. I do think some genetics lean towards, like, I will say, like haze strains have a lot more of that green. Like you have to pheno hunt through it to find ones that don't have some of those, like celery or like green. Even the live plants smell like that before you're drying it. So that's like a terp that cannabis actually does produce, unfortunately. And like you want to pick away from that. Certain hemps have that smell too. We do have a question from Ridge Patch, who asks, is there a good way to switch from 6 a.m. on, 6 p.m. off to 6 p.m. on, 6 a.m. off in the middle of flower? I'm changing to day shift from night shift at work. Thanks, guys.
Ooh. Man.
Yeah, I don't know if it's
Slowly.
good, but I'd leave it in 24 hours of darkness once and then just flip it. That's what I would do.
I don't
I'd go
recommend
the
it.
other way. I'd go exactly the other way. I'd give them 24 hours of
You
light.
leave the light on totally?
Yeah.
Yeah. 24
Explain
hours of
it.
darkness is much more stressful
Well-
to plants than 24 hours of light.
Yeah, but I don't want
That does make sense.
Ooh, but what about
And plus,
One day's
it's the
not gonna
photo
re-veg.
period that screws up the reproductive cycle anyway. So avoiding a lights out period altogether might confuse the plants a little bit, but I don't think that that's going to be as big of a stressor to them. So the lights are supposed to be on for 12 hours. They stayed on for 24, and then they went off for 12 hours, and then 12, 12, 12, 12. Yeah, I think that that's the way I would play that.
And I think we'll just all acknowledge that there's not a ton of there's no research on this, right? So we're all kind
Yeah,
of giving
no.
our best guess. So
I don't know.
Tao had his thought.
No,
Doc
but
has his
let
thought.
me, no. This way it makes sense to me. You're not going to have a nighttime where the sun comes out ever. You may have a daytime where the cloud cover is almost like it's dark. So I think it would be beneficial to leave it in dark that extra time. Personally, that's
When
what I
I've
would
done
do,
it, that's how
even
I've done it.
against Dr. MJ's brilliance, I would go against. So
I've never done it.
Yeah,
such a
I mean,
speed. I've done like an
dude.
hour or two change, but when I've done it through the dark. I'll just leave them in dark for not what's 24 hours, but it'll be like an 18-hour, like a 12-hour darkness and then extra whatever to get to the
I
next part
agree
of
with that
cycle.
too, though, Jack. If you're going to walk them one day at a time, I'd add an hour to the darkness. Like 1 hour at a time, right? Walking the dark cycle.
No, so I did
mean-
kind of like Tao was saying, but instead of going full 24-hour dark cycle, like they would normally be on 12-12, for example, right? Instead of getting a 12-hour, it'd be like a 16-hour night, and then I'd have it turn on whenever it's supposed to turn back on after a full 12, and then the light
Right.
cycle would be the earliest, soonest one that happens in reality, because like our time and the plant's time is two different schedules, as we can set their time.
I would say, I mean, like, if they get only a dark period and no light, like they're starving.
They're starving.
They're literally starving. So like,
So I wouldn't.
yeah, I feel like that's not very fair to the plant.
It's gonna stress them out for that reason. And it's always the scoto period that's sensitive to the plant, right? It's the dark period.
Technically.
That how
Yeah,
long
exactly.
the dark period is what affects their reproductive cycle. And how long the dark period is something that the plants need to budget for. They need to sort of plan and prepare and store energy to survive that. How long the lights are on, I'm not aware of that sort of any research that shows that plants are as sensitive to how long the lights are on.
Well, and we know
I've had a lot of
autoflowers.
growers ask the question, like, can I do, 16 on and 12 off in rotation? So like you're living in a planet that has like 28-hour days or whatever. I don't know that we're aware of the answer to that question. Really,
People are messing around with it. Go read through the forums. There's like one or two guys that have tried like 6 on, 2 off, like 10 on, 5 off. Like there's every single freaking light cycle out there. So I mean, people have messed with it. But now that I'm hearing the discussion again, and we've talked about this in the past and many ways of doing it, but from a logic perspective, like what Doc is saying, I've never actually tried it that way, and I would go with doing that because the plant doesn't necessarily, like, there's examples.
Yeah.
Autoflowers can handle 24 hours of light. And what's your major concern? What Doc and Matthew are describing is, okay, the major concern with being off for 24 hours is the plant is being starved of light. That is a concern. But with the light being on for 24 hours, like, yeah, okay, it might be stressful or whatever, but I don't think that the plant is going to re-veg. I know a lot of people who try to re-veg, and it takes
I don't think
weeks
it's going
or
to
a
be veg,
month.
but it's going to get confused. I might throw out herms or something.
That could it could happen.
The
It could
herm's
harm.
going to be more from the stress of the 24 hours of darkness. I mean, that's why I wouldn't want to do it. I'd be worried about putting those kind of stressors on the plant. Yeah, it's not,
But you
you're going
follow
to
my
stress the
logic.
plant.
Yeah. There would be no sunlight at nighttime. There might be darkness during the day occasionally. That's my
Yeah.
theory. And I'm
That's
I feel
sticking
like-
to
how I
that.
always used to do it.
I
It's
feel
like
like
a really
it's one of
cloudy
those
day,
things
like when the
where-
power goes out.
Yeah, glad
It's
he does.
yeah.
I think
It's
both
like-
theories have merit, and at this point, they're just hypotheses. I mean, I don't
Yes.
think that there's been enough testing of this specific question to be able to say one's right or the other's wrong.
I'm gonna go
But
get a grant from the feds.
there
and
you
do
go,
this
get a grant.
experiment.
we need to study how to best effectively flip the flowering period in the day-night cycle, right? Is that by leaving the
Yeah.
lights off for a long period of time or leaving the lights on for a long period of time?
For all
I
of our
like
day
it.
shift workers changing to night shift workers, we're here for you. We answer
And I
these
would love
questions.
when research like that starts to be possible. I mean, they do research like that. If you're like a cotton farmer or a corn farmer or whatever, there's all sorts of research that's been done about these kinds of things, about best season to plant, about, the best time of day to harvest, about all these kinds of issues that we've only barely scratched the surface. So this would be an interesting one. And especially with a photo period plant like cannabis, testing some of that, the specific responses to the different stressors.
Yeah, I agree. I have a feeling it's going to be one of those things where, like, intuitively it would make sense one way, but when you look at right. But often it's the plants are like us or something like that kind of a thing.
But then
Or
you have to
maybe-
figure out, well, why was I intuitively wrong? What was I missing in that? And build your mental model better, right? And that's how we end up with sort of a working horticultural knowledge. Exactly.
Indeed.
True.
Great point. We've got another great follow-up question from Grunt Grow, not follow-up question, but a separate question. They say, Jack, what meter do you recommend for drying? Also, how about drying with plans for washing it? I've heard about 3-day dry, then freeze being a great method. And I like that method because I think it gets off a lot of the stuff that we were talking about earlier, whether I don't think it necessarily is chlorophyll, but maybe some of the other undesirable early organic compounds and just a certain amount of moisture, so that when you're doing a wash, like people talk about their wash percentages, and like if they get above 5% with fresh frozen, they're happy, because like fresh frozen, you're taking such a heavy amount of material because so much of it is wet, but then it's frozen, obviously, but a lot of that is moisture. And when you're washing it, your returns are relatively low. Like 5% is not a giant number. So yeah, I think that doing the 3-day dry, I've seen solventless BNV be kind of the person who popularized that. I just wanted to show the meter because I was asked. I'm not sponsored by them, but this is the one that I use in conjunction with Herbs Now so that I don't overdry. I did overdry at least once, and I was like, never again. I don't want to overdry my buds. So if I'm going to use the Herbs Now, which is accelerating the dry to about a 5-day dry period versus like a 14 hang dry, this meter is like $28 on Amazon. Tevwool. It's a wood moisture meter, and there's multiple settings, but I find either one that I use reads about the same. It's like within 1% of each other. So for Grunt Grown, who was the one who asked, I just wanted to show that off. And for anybody else who's wondering, like I said, not sponsored, but that's just the one that I use. Shout out to my buddy Reed, who recommended it to me a long time ago. Aaron the Grower uses it as well. Somebody's like, oh, I've seen Aaron the Grower use it. I'm like, I recommend it to him, and he loves it. I also like that it gives you kind of that moisture activity. For like him in the legal market, I think they might have to be around 10% for testing. I think he goes for like 10 to 12. Brandon, is there a moisture activity level requirement for Oklahoma?
I believe so. I think it's like
I think you said under 15, maybe.
yeah, I want to say it's under 15. I think it might be 12.
Okay.
Actually, I have to look because I haven't looked at the news. I haven't been doing any testing personally. I'm mainly focusing on Bokashi Earthworks and then consulting. So I'm not the guy who sends off for testing, and I am not sure if they changed any of the laws. So.
Aaron's doing the whole, I think, vertically integrated, like start to finish. Other than I think he has distributors that he's selling it through. If you go to his Instagram, you could find
No,
Aaron the Grower's
he
products.
he does all the that dude's pounding pavement all himself, dude. He's like going he's fucking going to dispensaries himself to drop his product off.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, he's posting the ones that pick up his product.
That dude's
and
doing
he's
it.
stamping it himself.
Yeah, he's getting it solid out here. He's
A lot of love for him.
Yeah, I got to see him at the Cowboy Cup just recently.
He's a great dude. I was very fortunate to meet him in Northern California before he left California, and I got to see his farm up there. And he's a great person. His wife and daughter are amazing people, and I really just wish the best for him. I see him chasing his dream. He's doing a great thing. That's why he can't be with us tonight. He's a very busy guy. Like Brandon said, he's pounding the pavement and doing a lot of things right. So I'm happy for them. I think Michigan was one that I think it's 10% moisture activity, which to me, like under 10%, like, because if you have to test it at that, it's only going to be that or lower by the time it gets to the consumer, is kind of unfortunate. So, because like my favorite smoke is like 12 or 13%. And as far as the texture of the bud, like you can feel it. If you smoke the flower long enough, you know what consistency you like and the texture of a bud when it's at that right moisture content and when it's either too dry or too moist. And certain markets are mandating that it's going to be drier than some people are having used to been smoking for years and years. So it's going to be tough for them to adjust. They're going to keep going to their maybe old plug until things change.
I think one of the thing about moisture that's really overlooked from a consumer perspective is if you're somebody who likes to smoke joints or likes to smoke blunts and you go roll something up that's really, really dry, the fact that it's dry and that the way that it grinds up, it's going to actually burn hotter when you hit it because it's a finer material. And that's going to affect the flavor and the smoke. So you might be having a harsher experience on your hits because of that material. Now, if you get material that has a higher moisture content that's kind of like fresh, it's not going to burn as fast. And so it's not going to be as hot when it's being burnt. So there's a direct correlation, on that aspect as well.
A chunkier grind, unless you're like vaporizing. I think vaporizing, it's great to grind it up really finely, and then you're not combusting at all, so you don't have to worry about that. And also moisture content is like less of a thing. Like I've had some bud that was way too early to be smoked, but like when you vape it, it's funny, you'll see like a ton of vapor and you're like, holy shit, like this must be like really potent, but it's really just a lot of water content, and your like lungs kind of get like, you cough a lot more if it's too early. And it helped me realize like once after like a hit or two, the water content is pretty much gone because vaporizers are like 300 plus degrees or whatever. So that first hit might be a lot of water content, but it's a good way for you to get an early test on a strain is if you're going to try and sample it maybe earlier, is to vaporize it versus smoking it, for anybody out there who may be a little bit impatient, maybe needing that medication earlier than the 14-day dry plus whatever extended cure certain people are going through before they feel they're ready to smoke their buds. Growing a bunch and then having stuff left over from the last harvest is obviously ideal. So that's the goal, but definitely lots of great ways to try and cure that. I think we've covered many of them though tonight, and we have plenty other questions. I know that I mentioned that we were going to open it up to the chat, but I do want to get to these last couple questions before we throw out that link. And let's see, we've got one more from Oiltown, or no, Grunt Grown says, grow bags are awesome. They are cheap and do a great job of regulating humidity as well as not having the statics from pull off the trichomes from the buds. So that's another one. I've actually seen a lot of people recommending that recently, and shout out to all the home growers out there that are using them with success. It's like a bag that I believe is partially perforated so that it keeps the RH within a certain range, not allowing it to go too high or too low. So a lot of people, I was skeptical as I am with everything. It kind of looked like it was in like the Bovita or Integra kind of line of things, like a additional product to kind of help people get more in that ideal range. And it can help, but I didn't think it was like necessary, and I still kind of feel that way. But I've heard people like that have a lot of experience that tried it, and they said that it was like better than their glass jars or better than their turkey bags or other things like that. So I'm curious to try them myself at some point just to see. I like to give everything a fair shot myself and at least see. But this is Grunt Grown who's saying it, and I've heard a lot of other growers that I interact with on a regular basis that have also spoken highly of that. So if you are having struggles with the dry and the gear still, grow bags might be an option out there for you to check out, just to throw that out there. And that was actually the last sort of question or comment. And unless I have to scroll back up, I'm sure there's more in the chat. But yeah, curious if you guys have any thoughts before I go ahead and share that link.
Nay.
No, but they were asking about fresh frozen, and I think from what I understand, you do the fresh frozen so that you don't lose the terps at all, right?
Yeah, and you don't have to trim or do anything else. I saw somebody else that like, what's the advantage of it? I'm like, wow,
right.
Like you just put the whole plant in.
But like the Rosinate was saying, it reduces yield dramatically, supposedly.
Well,
right?
it's the ratio. If you're counting the whole weight of the plant against the weight of what you pull out of it, then that's a terrible ratio. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a terrible yield, right?
It's going to be
terpier. You're counting
like,
the water weight as part of the denominator.
So like, let's say you hang dried for 14 days. okay, you're going to lose like 80% of the weight in water, roughly. Okay. So let's say you
Right.
started with 1,000 grams wet from your 1,000 grams plant. You take that and you freeze it. You have 1,000 grams of frozen product. You wash that, you get 5%. That's 50 grams on your return. That's an average return. Where the person who goes and takes the dried product, which might not have as much terpenes because it was dried in a hotter environment, they flash off as low as 68 degrees, as well as esters and other things like that. But they're going to have a greater percentage return because they're washing 200 grams, right? And of that 200 grams, it's like all very trichomus buds. It's not a bunch of water. So
Water weight. Yeah.
instead of a 5% return, they're going to get much higher returns on that. And
Right.
so
yeah, that's why those numbers on fresh frozen are
no, it
so
makes sense.
vanishingly small. It's like 1%. Screw that. But it's like 1% of the total weight of the entire plant that's wetly cut
Wet
down.
plant. Yeah. All right. Good enough.
And then like 50 grams going into 200 would be a much greater percentage than 50 grams going into 1,000, just as a obvious example, right? So the dried, even though it's going to have like less terpenes, people really like it because like when you smell a plant live, a lot of people are like, oh man, I wish I could smoke like exactly how that live plant was. And live rosin for a lot of people is the closest experience to that. Like if you get a really nice freeze dried hash rosin that was done properly, it can be some of the tastiest stuff out there, in my opinion. Great flour, I think, can definitely match it or be even better. But there is some spectacular hash artists and even extract artists from the solventless or solvent side of the field. It's like I've heard great things from Fergolia. There's tons of people out here in California, whether it's butane or other things, that they purge it down to literally zero. Like the tests come back and it's non-detectable amounts of solvent. So it is at that point. I mean, if a GCMS can't detect solvent in it, it might as well be solventless, right? But it was made with a solvent, obviously, but they purge out all the stuff that you don't want. And it can be very, very, very tasty. I know that a lot of people like to turn their nose up to anything made with a solvent if they're that kind of heady solventless type. And I know many of those people out here in California. It's a lot more expensive if you're getting into the like ice water hash and dry sift and things like that. The solvent stuff is coming at per gram costs way, way lower, like diamonds and sauce and all that other great textures that have been popular nowadays have gotten a lot more affordable. But I said that I was going to share the link and I forgot to do that. So let me go and copy that and let the rest of the crew wax poetic about cannabis and all those great things.
Somebody just asked me a question that I can answer here on live about Rowdy asked if the dry back, he fertigates during the lights on and doesn't fertigate. I'm trying to scroll back and see where the question is. He said, I'm growing in organic amended cocoa perlite using HFF. I every 2 hours during lights on. What sort of issue am I causing by not fertigating during lights out? At 18.6, not much. So the 6 hours is, you would be only missing one fertigation during that dark period. And it would be after, 4 hours into a 6 hour dark period or whatever. So not much. If you flip this to a 12-12 cycle though, and you're still only watering during lights on, then you're going to go a 12-hour dry back in between watering events. And then, only a 2-hour dry back between each other event. So if you have this set up that you get the same amount of water at each event, you're not going to get back to saturation on that first event because it's a larger dry back. Or if you are, you're going to be sort of excessively fertigating all the other events during that day. So, 18.6 is probably not going to be an issue. High frequency on a 12-12 cycle is when we start to create problems with that. That's all
So
I got.
there's a small delay, but I did just post the link in the chat and I pinned it on the Cheap Home Grow YouTube channel here from the Cheap Home Grow account. It says link to join Zoom call live streamed on YouTube. Join with IG or YouTube name or you will not be admitted, and then link. So if you do want to click on that, the only reason I give that caveat is we want to make sure we know who's jumping in other than just like iPhone or like Steve M, like we don't want your government name unless you're comfortable sharing that. and we're familiar with you from the chat. Like we've got some people in here that I would recognize their actual name. So if you want to join under that name, then you're welcome to do that. But yeah, most of us, I think, have like a name that we use on here, like the Dog Doctor, as an example. A pretty
Wait,
regular
that's not
guest.
his real name?
That's not his real name,
Oh,
shockingly.
damn.
I thought he was a dog doctor. I was like, are you a vet? I still don't even remember the answer. I got too stoned, I forgot. But
He's
great guy.
gotta be. It's official.
Official, yes. He's the
That's
official
the
dog
official
doctor.
dog
Official
doctor.
dog doctor.
And
Yeah.
he is
Hey.
back, live and direct. 5:30. We got half
Hi,
an hour with him
everybody.
on the Cheap Home Grow tonight.
How is everybody
Canine
doing?
position.
Can you guys hear me?
We
Yes,
can.
we can.
Hello, dog doctor.
Oops, sorry. How are you all? Thank you. Spartan, hope you get better well soon.
He's in chat with us now, so he's
I know. I was chatting there with telling that. Oh, okay, let me take this thing out.
I somehow didn't notice that. I'm glad that he's here. I hope he gets better too.
we got oil jumping in here too in a second. I'm sure Dog Doctor is probably going to show off his garden if he feels
Sure,
up to
yes, sir.
doing
I'm
so.
just
I know you
taking
usually do.
this. Yep, there we go. There we go. And you guys were talking about this, so I kind of pulled it out.
Is that your wood moisture meter?
Yes, I actually don't use it a lot, but since you guys were talking about it, I kind of pull it out and we can try one. Just, I don't know.
Live test. Funny story while you do it. I saw a can of cribs where they were doing this and the boss was there and he was like going through the dry room and he's like, this is the dry expert. And then like, he's like, the number is supposed to be between like 12 and 15. And the number was like 8. And he's like, you're messing up. You need to get on top of your game. He's like, was blowing it. So
That's
For those
funny.
of you guys that know, you see
That
right
is
now,
pretty
the
funny.
perfect quadextrous
Oh,
application.
you called him
right
out, man.
here.
He's got like 7.8. What's he at? What's he at there?
11.8.
11.8.
11.8. Sorry,
That's
I'm watching
money.
the review, the delayed feed.
No, it did some weird thing with the 7 first.
No,
but
you
now
had
it's
to push
11.3,
down into it a
11.5.
little.
I
like
had to push
control.
it down. I was trying to find a
Ooh,
way
we're
to
hitting
grab it in
quarter
front of me.
10.
There you go. Okay, I'm on
That's
the live
perfect
screen
range.
now.
That's perfect range. 10 to 12 is great smoke. That's
Yep.
nice, sticky, icky right there. Above 10 is
uh,
crushing it.
I'm testing it for the first time actually. I'm actually yeah. I
Roll that
normally
Pass it over.
Oh.
There
There
you
we
go.
go.
Look at that.
I'll spark some
Bump
up.
this is
fast.
that bubble OJ, the one with the mites and everything. She came out really nice.
Yeah, I often like
Okay.
to let people know that you know, if you get something like a spider mite or other things like that, like a lot of people despair, maybe because there's an ick factor associated, perhaps. But to be honest, you know, your plants can still come out really amazing, especially if you get it early. I mean, look at these things; like they are not fatigued.
Dude, these things have suffered a lot. I had one light first that stopped working, so I had to change, which was a good thing because that one was getting burned. But the burn one is not anymore burned, and it's the biggest one of them all now. Well, look at that beast over there.
Chunky.
Yeah, then I put that little one in here, and I thought this is not enough lights. So, but I cannot take it out because this is really tall.
I'll just say that
Probably-
that chunky one you showed, that's one I would actually, as much as it hurts my heart, I would break that one apart when I dry it up because I'd be afraid it's so fat that it would be one of those that would have bud rot if you leave it to dry and it's like
That-
full
Or wet trim it.
thick top. Yeah.
And that's going to the rack and it's going to be wet trimming, exactly. And if you notice, I don't have the wind directly there. It's pointing the wall, but it's actually, I try my best to not to prevent that bud grow over there. So now what I did, since I'm changing this like Dr. MJ Coco suggested, I had this one stop, so I put it here. And I felt like now is enough light for them there.
Okay. It looks
After-
interesting. It's definitely not sort of textbook lighting situation going on there, but I realize you're doing the best you can.
I cannot put
It
this up
looks like
here.
it's working.
Yeah, look
because
at that.
if I put that up there, we will be touching.
You know,
the bud
I
here.
understand what you're doing. I mean, I got you.
this is actually a really I mean, it's a literal balancing act, right?
Yeah. But to all the new growers out there, he didn't grow these fire buds because he's got his light set up like that. He's got his light set up like that because they're trying to get out of the way of his monster buds.
This
Pretty
is
much.
true.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is
No, somebody will show up next week and they've got their lights set up like that. They're like, I saw this guy on the internet, man, and he had this like great garden and he had these lights at all these funky angles, and that's what I'm going to try to do.
Yes, exactly. No, he has lights in spite of his plants.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put some down here going up also, maybe some straws.
Oh,
over
don't
there.
joke about that. There's a scrog out there right now that's doing it. They're selling it right now. It's
Oh,
a real
really?
thing. Yeah, there's a scrog with an LED light that shoots up into the bottom of your canopy, and I'm just like face palming because
I was
the bottom of your
literally
leaves.
joking.
Oh, I talked to a company about there's a company making under canopy lighting systems. Yeah, just one for the commercial space. And I had a long conversation with them at MJ BizCon.
So
And
since I
I'm
started-
curious to know more about that. Actually, that sounds
It
very
was an
interesting.
interesting conversation.
Definitely is. So since
Side
I'm
lighting, I
moving
could kind of
lights-
see justified in certain situations, but under lighting is absolutely no. But top lighting, I think, is 100% the best way. If you just give
Oh, really?
adequate
See, I'm a
amounts from the
more
top.
fan of underlighting than side lighting, but I don't think that it's really a necessary improvement. And the returns are going to be to the, and there are returns at all. And this is kind of what I was pushing on with the guy in Las Vegas was, they're just going to be much smaller returns than you're getting from your overhead light. So from an efficiency perspective, you might still increase yields, but you're not going to be increasing efficiency.
I
It would
agree.
be interesting.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Go. Okay. I just think it would be interesting if, like, maybe like for some plants, I don't think there are really any plants. Maybe there's some, maybe not like commercial plants, but like, I don't know if they had the physiology, if they were able to breed them in such a way that they could like make use of it, maybe, but like, I don't think.
I'll say I saw Miami Mango had a garage set up where they had top lighting was HPS and they had these little sliders up and down and it was side lighting LED and it was like single strips of what looked like, Samsung LED diodes. And it was basically just trying to like bulk up the lowers so that their whole entire canopy was fat, top notch A grade buds. And they filled out like a garage just to get the maximum.
It's not really,
per square
I don't know
feet.
that that's going to work. Because
It
the
looked
plant
good. The
doesn't
plants
just
that they were
distribute
growing
its
looked
energy
amazing.
locally. The plant doesn't be like, this leaf is getting light, so this flower gets bigger. I think a lot of growers believe that like there's a really tight one-to-one relationship there, and that in order to grow the lower buds, you need to get the lower leaves or even the lower buds themselves light. But the plant will preferentially allocate its energy towards the part of the plants that it thinks have the strongest chance of reproduction. So if it's limited on energy, it will push that towards the canopy. If it's not, it'll grow out those lower sites. But yeah, I think it's a way everybody's trying to get that little additional edge, right? I don't think that I'm not a big fan of any of these things, but
Hey, Doc, let me ask you
Yeah.
a quick question. Is all green parts of a plant photosynthesizing?
I mean, to some extent, yeah, but not really. So like the stems and the flower sites, the bracts or whatever themselves, they're not really producing significant photosynthate, and they're not sharing it with sort of the rest of the plant. So the part of the plant that's really photosynthesizing and then sharing that, photosynthate resource with other parts of the plant are the leaves.
Big leaves, yeah.
Yeah, so getting light directly to like the cannabis bud sites themselves or the flowers isn't helpful to your crop. They're not photosensitive. They're not they don't respond differently whether they're in the light or out of the light. And they're not able to really efficiently harvest the photons for photosynthesis like leaves can.
And when you're well lit, the bottom stuff, I've had completely shaded buds that'll bulk up like with adequate, like it was completely shaded. I left it a thing just experimentally, the very bottom branch, and it pushed out a fat bud.
Strain specific too, though.
Some strains are better than others, but I want to welcome in Stairs at Plants and say hello. You're showing off your garden. It looks great right now. I've got you and the dog doctor spotlighted right now. Dog doctor showing us what looks like his veg, but I want Stairs at Plants to go ahead and say hello to the Cheap Home Grow audience again and tell us what we're looking at. It looks good.
I'm crinkle
Hello,
that leaf.
everyone. There's the plants here.
Hello, buddy.
Grower. What I got here is some amnesia haze that I'm running at about day 85 right now. And I sent a message to Doc in the chat because he says that the trichomes aren't an accurate way to harvest a plant. So I'm looking for his advice. What do you consider when you're into these long strain harvest plants, 12, 13 weeks? Where do you harvest something like that? Because I'm keeping my leaf temperature surface down below 80, but yet I'm getting foxtailing on it. So something's telling me.
I don't think that's foxtailing.
Okay.
It's a genetic when it goes that long.
Well, that plant, yeah. So we'll come back to that. But can you go in on those calyxes again? Yeah, I don't think that that's real foxtailing. That's an open calyx structure, and the flower's doing it all over the flower. So a foxtail is a response that a plant will have, a proper foxtail. I see people all the time calling that what you're showing foxtailing and thinking that it's a problematic growth characteristic. But the foxtail that's a problematic is something happened. It's usually excessive heat on that bud that basically kills the bud, and it will grow one foxtail out of that bud. It's not like growing like all foxtails out of like all of the calyxes basically are becoming a foxtail. It's basically giving up on that bud that like died and growing a new branch out to grow more buds on that new branch. And it's a one long skinny thing. So if you guys at home are seeing things like these flowers here, there's some plants that just like mature that way with a really open calyx structure. They got like little fingers that grow off of the bud in all sorts of different direction. Sometimes that's a sign that, they might be ready to harvest when they start really doing that if it hadn't been doing it before. But it's not the same as sort of a foxtail caused by heat, which is really a problematic growth thing that you
Does it have haze in the lineage at all? You said it's like a 12-weeker long finisher, stairs of plants. What strain is that one that you were saying is foxtailed, the one we were just looking at earlier?
This is amnesia haze, but when you look at the amnesia, you probably know this better than me, Jack. You're pretty versed on these strains. That amnesia isn't like a true haze. And there's
amnesia from who?
Well, this is this is ganja.
I'm not trying to be rude. It's just there's 100
true,
different
though.
breeders.
No, that's a Jack Greenstein question. I love it.
It's ganja farmer, but I don't know who they grabbed their amnesia haze from.
Is ganja farmer a seed bank or a breeder?
It's a bank.
Ganja farmer's a new seed bank. Dog Doctor's also growing some of their stuff. They just, on the Grow Diary site that we're involved with, they sponsor a few competitions. So that's why I ran their gear.
I liking the genetics they're sending me. They send me a bunch of them already, the new ones for next year. I'm pretty curious to test them. Actually, the one we see before is from them, the Bubble J gum.
I'll say this about amnesia. Amnesia haze is super silver haze. It's the same strain. It came out the same year. It's not a coincidence. People like to change names and sell stuff under different flagships. You get different phenotypes. The super silver haze, look at the lineage. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. It has a lot of different expressions. Yeah. So what's one person's amnesia, even if you took a cut, the amnesia that got popular in the UK, it's different in each person's grow room. There's pretty similarities, like a strong uplifting high, but smells and tastes, and even within the same jar, if you pass it to me and Matthew, we're going to smell different things. So
the one I grew was the Dutch Passion ones. It's very different from the one you're growing. She was very different.
Every plant of some of those can be different. I've grown a bunch of super silver hazes that are all different too, each individual plant. And a couple of them have the open calyx structure like we saw on that amnesia haze.
And even the same one grown... Sorry.
Oh, no, it's no problem. I also have the association. I also wanted to say that I have some impressions about Stares at Plants' question. Although he asked you directly, Dr. Coco.
Okay, well, you can certainly chime in. I was going to say, I'm not trying to say that plant isn't ready to harvest either. My overall sort of look at it and not looking at those two the two colas that are in front, which I assume are a younger plant, right?
Earlier in the
Yeah.
flower for sure.
Yeah. But the plant, it looks like it might be ready to harvest.
Can I just throw a random piece of advice, because I've grown a lot of these longer flowering sativas that has helped me in the past when you get those kind of, they almost seem like they're never going to finish. If you're running 12-12, drop it to 11-13 for a few days, or even to extreme, a 10-14 for like 2 or 3 days, just to get that one to finish up. And I don't think it's going to negatively impact the rest of your flower that badly. You could even increase your DLI, not total DLI, but you can increase your lighting a tad bit just so the other plants in there don't suffer. But I've noticed a lot of those longer flowering sativas, if you give them a little bit longer dark period, they tend to want to finish up within a couple of days of doing that. You'll notice those white hairs start turning orange, and it just finishes plumping up, and it's like, oh, okay, now it's ready to harvest.
I had to harvest one of those signing silver hazes, man, when it had so many white pistils, like all just milky trichomes. There was, and it was just going to go like that forever. I became convinced that it would just stay like that until I harvested it. And when I pulled it down, it ended up being, I nicknamed that plant the best plant, because it was like my favorite plant to smoke of all the plants I pulled down. I think I grew 6 different plants that run, but it was the best one. So, you know, sometimes plants need to be harvested when they still have white pistils. And I definitely saw white pistils at the end of those open calyx structures on that plant. But I don't think that that's indicative of it not being ready to harvest. So if you're waiting for those to go away or change color, you may be waiting forever. They may always look
some plants will never stop pumping out the white hair.
Exactly.
I know some people that take them like 22 weeks, man, and eventually they'll go red. It's you got to stick it in the corner of that room and just let it keep flowering.
But I don't
forever.
necessarily think it's more ripe then, or more ready to be smoked for any other reason. I mean,
they claim more psychedelic effects at that level, but I haven't. I noticed some really good NL5 hazes that are done in like 10 to 12 weeks that have similar effects to these 16 to 22 week Neville's hazes and things like that.
What is that?
I want to welcome Potent Ponics.
Hey,
What's up,
where's the
Potent?
flower mill?
Potent buddy.
Hi. How's it going?
Where's love, my friend?
Speaking of Thailand, he said there's actually 28 venomous strains or something over there.
Yeah, we have more than what you mentioned. Yeah, we have like 24 vipers alone here. So,
I would say, personally, my opinion, I just wanted to say that my opinion on the harvest timeline is really just, I have an agnostic approach to that, in that, like, if you want a certain effect, and maybe if a plant is renowned or has been like bred enough that you can really expect consistency, then, you know, if you're going for a certain thing, just much like a wine grower, you know, you do it a certain way, you want a certain effect, and you consistently get that effect. On the other hand, you could harvest earlier if you wanted to, and you'll have a different effect that way. Maybe you'll enjoy that more.
Different flavors too.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I've
So
talked
I
about
think
that. Day 34 harvest. Somebody bought all of it because they loved it so much, and it was like a week 5 harvest.
some people eat green tomatoes. I do not, but
You're
some
right,
people
though.
do this. Yeah.
You can't account for taste, really.
There you go.
Some
That's,
people
that's
like
the
that.
answer right there.
Although you guys, you know, the reality is we deal with a lot of new growers, and new growers are often super excited to get to their first harvest, and they might be pretty
That's true.
tempted to harvest it a few weeks early, when we all basically know that they'd be happier with their harvest if they waited a couple more weeks. I mean, that's
You make a good point.
That's
Totally
the
agree.
reality.
You
Other
learn
than that,
too.
I really agree with you, Matthew. Like, try different things. You can't just
I
keep
think-
doing the same thing every time and expect that you know exactly what you like.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I
you
feel
never know
like this
until you
is the
try.
this is the equivalent of like you know, when you know the rules, you can break the rules.
Exactly. But learn the rules first, right?
But learn the rules.
Like, have a
So-
good harvest. Have a harvest that sort of knocks your socks off, and then be like, you know, I'm going to try to pull a plant a little bit earlier next time and see how that's different, or whatever. But
So
No CO2
Oiltown
here.
Oil's been patiently waiting. He's been here for a while. I want to give him a chance to talk about his garden and ask any questions he may have, and then I want Potent Ponics to walk us around, because there's lots of plants over there, and always cool to see the perspective from Thailand. But Oiltown Oil.
Track down Amy for us, Potent.
Yeah, wow.
Oh yeah, I'll show you the Amy's. I'll show you the Amy's. So these are we got a bunch of, this is blueberry. We got some white nightmare. So this one comes out.
Potent,
really
I just
great.
want to, can I have you pause this for a second? Because Oiltown Oil has been waiting for like 10 or 15 minutes, and we've only got about 10 minutes left in total. So
Go
I just
for
want to
it.
make sure he gets a chance to, if he has any questions, show off his garden real quick, and then I'll run it a few minutes extra at the end of this. so we can give everybody their time. But Oil Town Oil, go ahead.
Yeah, you guys have seen this little garden before. Really honored to be on the show again. Some questions about these guys. I'm wondering what that kind of leaf is kind of, I'm thinking maybe an iron or something. I'm seeing a little more on this guy here, but other than that, they're looking really good.
Is it possible there's too much light?
Sorry.
Am I seeing some halos, I wonder, or is it just necrosis?
What's
I'm
the
not sure.
EC like? Oil Town Oil.
Yeah. Well, I doubt there's too much light, but is it possible that you're giving them way too much light?
It's not likely.
It's not likely. Okay. People usually know that whether or not that's even sort of in the range of possibilities. If it's not, it's probably not.
The light that I'm using is not that big, and it's only set at 7 right now.
Yeah. So no, it's not. It's not too much.
I'm guessing EC or water. Like it was either water
pH,
too
it
much.
looks pretty
Yeah, maybe so.
pH, yeah.
That's the first thing
I
to
did
check.
bump
Like
up my EC a lot trying to put those newts in, so I may have to I'm just probably going to do like a very low EC for the last couple of weeks. That was
What is the EC that you used, or what was the highest it got to?
You're gonna hate me, but I don't know. I was aiming for
I think
around 300 though. My EC meter broke recently, and I haven't gotten a new one yet. It's on the way.
I'm trying to figure out what that actually means. What do you mean by 300?
Do you mean like Siemens?
Micro Siemens? Millisiemens?
No, it was I believe no, that was PPFD. I must have been. Yeah, PPFD was.
Okay, PPFD is a measure of the amount of light.
PPM. Yeah, PPM for was around 300 going into the plant.
Low.
Coming out of it was around like 500 or 600. So
it depends what PPM scale. There's 3 different PPM scales, so it could be
the EC
right on. It could be low or it could be high.
Where's that bottle? Because I was aiming for the bottles ranges.
I don't trust bottles for that exact reason. I think they want you to use more so that you buy more. And
what is their what product is this that we're looking at?
It's that stupid Med One.
Okay,
all-in-one. I don't like it. I don't recommend.
Go back to the recommended DC dose. Yeah, let it focus.
It's pretty high. The recommended at that full bloom EC is 1250 for ppm EC, and then
1250 for ppm. What's the EC?
2.5 EC.
2.5 inflow is really high. If you're going to be up
at the very highest, but
yeah.
So
that's what could be it. What about your pH practices?
pH is on point. My pH going in is around 5.9 because the pH coming from the soil is a little high, so it comes out at around like 6.1, 6.3.
What is the media that you're growing in?
Like a soil mix from like an organic from Lowe's, just like organic Miracle Grow mixed with some mycorrhiza is the main base, and then I've added in like a little bit of
Miracle Grow. So was there time-release newts?
There's a small amount of like frass and stuff in there too. Like
there's a small amount of that, but there's definitely some castings I mixed in there.
Okay,
but that little guy maybe got too much juice, but he was saying only about 300.
This was the run in the front right. I remember this. We told him to kill this because it was an auto, but it ended up not getting burnt.
The dates for October 1st for these guys, and then this one was a week and a half later. So
I think that one didn't experience as much of the nutrient issue because it's smaller. It didn't eat through as much of the food in the pot or whatever it is. You know,
it looks much healthier. But,
right. So you started with amended newts, and you're trying to transition to a fertigation practice.
Right? Next time, I'm definitely going to be following Coco. Don't look at this as anything that I'm proud of. So
no, I'm just trying to figure out what I mean. I'm still trying to diagnose what the best course of action to do with those plants is to get them sort of.
There are autos that were from October 1st, so I don't think there's much time left on them, honestly.
I just say keep feeding low EC and then eventually drop it down to a flush. I mean,
I'm going to eventually go to the flush. Like I'm planning on flushing soon.
Okay. Yeah.
This one still
they have enough meat on them that I mean, you could let them just starve out at this point. Like they're not quite ready, but a week maybe more.
That one looks fine. It's the other one that looks like it's just really starting to cannibalize itself.
It's got the
those
most
top leaves. It's got some immobile nutrient deficiency. I'd lean calcium is the suspect there. I mean, why it's attacking the top of the plant looks so much better than the bottom of the plant. Yeah.
Does anybody have
and I'll
to
tell
get
my-
running? I saw Brandon Russ, I think, has already jumped out, but
Mhm.
before I let Potent Ponics go and do his walkthrough, I wanted to give anybody an opportunity if they do have to run. I know that we usually only go for 2 hours, so I don't want to keep you any longer if you need to. So anybody, if you need
Can't
to,
stay
this can be okay.
forever, but I'm curious to see Potent Ponics talk about the
Me
farm raised
too.
concept.
I'm glad that Steve's here, so
Mhm.
I'll stay as well.
All
I can
righty.
stay forever.
It sounds like we're in for it. Oil Town Oil, do you have any more questions, or are you good to go
That's
on?
his dry box.
Not really. I'll just kind of
Dry
just
box.
showing off the drying little box here that I made up quick. A little EC meter. I think the airflow is going to come from the bottom.
Get
One
a
of these
fan
things.
going through there.
I
At least
like
like a
it.
small little like 4-inch, like a
Get one of
desktop
these
type
to
thing.
Computer,
continue
a
running.
desktop fan, exactly.
Yeah, blow air into the bottom and come out the top. I think that's fine.
Yeah, that'll be enough. And then that with the ceiling fan still going. I would let the ceiling fan circulate because that's kind of like what Brandon was talking about earlier. They're just kind of having like a passive airflow, just having the air moving in the
Well,
room. But then you have the
You're
fan
You're not in
below it
Arizona,
to
right,
be a little more
dude?
active.
Have like that guy in the corner. This guy
If
running.
it's in
for it.
Arizona,
That
that
right up
might
in front
not
of the
be good.
box would be perfect, I think.
But outside the box.
Outside the box, but like pointed into it. So
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just you don't put it inside the box.
Yeah,
I
where
might-
are you?
I'm here
You're not in
new to
like
the
an
country.
Arizona desert area, right?
No, I am South Ontario.
Okay.
It gets real wet and gross here.
All right, so
And
yeah,
it's-
the fan won't hurt.
I think you
And
said it
you're
was
okay with the
69% RH.
Yeah, it
And
gets
You're okay
five
with
real
this?
wet.
F. Potent, do
And
you
you
want
have
to pop your camera back on and then you could give us a little walkthrough?
Oh, you have no problems with the smell also, yeah?
There he is.
Hey,
All right, got you spotlighted, and I will unspotlight.
all right.
Oops.
So,
I
we
stopped
got-
this video. Remove spotlight. There we go.
Get all kinds of stuff here. These are all blueberries. You can see some of them stretched a little bit. We had a bit of overcast for a couple of days, and we moved everything out here. But everything else is doing great. This is a pheno hunt. So these are just the stuff that we're checking right now. We're cloning everything up, seeing what's a boy, what's a girl, and then from here we'll start to make some decisions on what to keep and what not to. So this is all mostly Western stuff. There's a little bit of Thai stuff here near the end, which you can easily tell what's what.
Yeah.
The leaf width is instantly
That
obvious.
giveaway.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
cool. Looking at, I mean, it looked like a different species of plant.
It literally,
And
like,
then
that's how they
here's-
used to categorize it, the broadleaf versus the narrowleaf was like indica sativa back in the day was the
So
distinction.
here's all the Thai stuff, like the lots of more wild Thai stuff. You can see it's got
Yeah.
Beautiful.
really nice.
I want to hear more about the seeds, those large seeds that you posted about.
Oh yeah, so we have tons of cool seeds now. We've managed to network really well with Thai Seeds and M Mountain Bury Ram and Infamous Gardens and a bunch of other great people, and we'll be meeting up with more Thai growers in Chiang Mai. But I mean, you can see, look at the size of the leaf on this one. This one's a mutant though, so don't count that one. But almost all of these Thai stuff have just massive leaves already, even though they're tiny. But we have such big variation in smells with the Thai stuff. We have one that smells like you took. Imagine if you were sitting front row at Gallagher and he had a whole layer of guava and a whole layer of peaches, and he just started smashing the table with his mallet. It smells that loud.
Yeah,
Like the plant. I'll show you the plant that I'm talking about here, just so that you guys understand how crazy. It's over here. These are all from Jordan of the Isle or from Infamous Gardens, but the Siam syrups, these ones, even though they're that small, already I can smell it. Standing here right now. It
Wow.
smells like guava.
That's amazing.
They
That's
are loud as
incredible.
fuck.
Wow.
I love plants that smell and veg. My F3 Velvet Punch are like grapey and gassy. Maybe if Matthew comes over next time, he could see them. They're absolutely. I love it when they stink in veg. It's like shocking because you're not expecting a
I
plant
know,
to smell
right?
like it's in flower when it's in veg, but some of
We
them
got
do.
a lot of. So this is a trinode. So if you
Oh
look,
yeah, that's a good example.
see,
Very
it's got
neat.
3 nodes.
I love those.
3 nodes. Even when we topped it, it came out 3 nodes. So that's
That's
super
trippy.
cool.
I think that's
we
cool.
have a couple of mutants. There's this mutant here that just doesn't throw any branches.
Did you have any of
Oh,
Tao's
that's all.
stuff? He was saying you might have some amiaces over there.
Oh, I do. We'll get to that. We got this variegated. So that's a variegated plant. And you can see here, distant
True
as it goes up
variegation.
the plant. Yeah, real
That's what it's
variegation.
supposed to look like, not a
Yes.
virus or viroid.
We got a bunch of cool stuff. And then down here, so these ones are interesting. So these are, well, here's the Gas Mac VMAC 1 or Mac 2 from Brennan Rust. I'm going to throw that on the screen too. Cheers, Brennan. And then this is the Australian Bastard Cannabis Cross with Freak Show, and it didn't show either one. We have more
That's
seeds that we
hilarious.
popped with it to try and find some interesting phenos in it.
That's Freaky Bastard, right? From Canada Seeds.
Yep. And then we have a bunch of Freak Show crosses. This is a regular old Freak Show.
He's like F11'd it, right?
Yep.
Crazy, man.
Yeah,
I think it'll be
he's
good for you
got
guys in Thailand for sure, with the mildew and mold resistance and better airflow and things like that. But they've got lots of landrace and stuff over there that seem to do very well. I think the larger leaf on those Thai makes kind of sense because they're so thin. They have to photosynthesize, right? So it makes sense. It's
Oh, that's beautiful.
larger.
Well, too much leaf and everything cooks here, so you can grow these guys in full sun. These guys do really well in southern climates or anywhere it's hot. These the Freak Shows are just gonna kill it. These are bomb show. So this is THC bomb crossed with Freak Show.
Shade cloth is awesome in like Southern California, or it seems like the same over there. If you get too much sun, shade cloth can actually make greenhouse or outdoor growing a lot more successful to preserve a lot of the, or just make the plants grow more beneficially. Even like a diffused light greenhouse, I think, can make it a lot less intense so the plants thrive a little bit more.
There's one that self-topped, so it just terminated in a leaf for whatever reason, and then the branches grew. I got a second one like that over there as well. You got another Freak Show, tons of these different Freak Show crosses, and then so you can see this is the sister of this one. Nothing alike. It's just pretty wild. And then we have a bunch of red Lebanese puck and puck F3s. We have some dog lickers. This is another trinode plant.
Are you implementing aquaponics in this garden?
Yeah, so in the back, in the back here, you can, all the new construction will be connected to aquaponics, and then we'll eventually convert this to probably living soil beds just for the nursery. But maybe aquaponics, we'll see. This is all Rasta Jeff, so this is Inspector Royale, John Lemon. And,
what's the deal over there? Is it plant count? Is it canopy size? Like, how do you go about having
just
this
have a
amount of
license?
plants?
Have a license and have the property to put them on that you can fence them off in, and you're good to go.
That's awesome. I love to hear it. That's how it should be.
Oh yeah, no, like there's really, I can't, short of just seeing my dad now and then, there's not really a good reason to come back right now. I kind of have an unlimited play. I mean, I have this room and this room to play for pheno hunting for now. We flower out everything over there, and this is going to be our breeding facility, which I'll show you here in a second. But there was one or two other plants I wanted to show.
It reminds me of Breeder Steve, your fellow potentponics aficionado, or I should say just aquaponics aficionado. He's had similarly like large, and still does, and in Colombia, giant grows fueled by aquaponics and doing massive pheno hunts of lots and lots of different seeds. So lots of respect to both of you, Steves. Killing it.
That's true.
That's how I ended up here, actually, is through him. We're good friends, and he was looking for a grower, and I was finishing up a project in Ada, and check this one out. Tucked under. Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah, I love that.
I like that.
I've seen that.
It almost has like no serration, but it has like just a tiny bit, but it's like smooth at the same time.
This is Candy Slurricane.
I love Slurricane crosses. They taste so good.
Siam syrup sounds cool too.
Yeah, so that one was a result of a huge open pollination. They had like 50 or 60 different males, and they crossed it with this one female because of an accident that happened where someone moved plants around and someone put females in the male room of this one strain called Siam syrup. So that's what, so they all got, each one smells. So one smells like cheese, one smells like peaches and guava. Like the main one is the peaches and guava, but there's like a mango funk cheese, and then there's like a funk guava. It's got like all three kind of things playing around in there. It's definitely the one I'm probably the most excited about at the moment.
That sounds
But,
very
I mean,
exciting.
here's one of the other mutants. It's like bizarre.
Wow.
Like
double
two-tone.
thing going on. Yeah, just again, when you're popping 1,000 seeds at a time or whatever, you're gonna get some weird shit.
Yeah, you get some weird stuff.
What a dream, buddy. Congratulations,
show
my
you
friends.
Hold on. Where was Amy?
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, how can we miss Amy? That's the whole tour. That's the
Dude.
highlight.
How is she treating anyway?
We got to prove she's really
She's
international.
good. Amy's over here. Where's Amy? In this section somewhere.
She can't be that special if you can't see her already.
Whatever you are.
No, hold on.
You don't recognize her, Tao? I mean, come on.
Yeah, there's only
right.
1,000
Come
plants
on.
there.
He
Dude.
just
Come on.
walked by
Step
her.
up your game.
Yeah, did we just pass her already?
Oh, it's right here.
Yeah.
Dark Hollow, Sour D. I know it's in this section here. Hold on. They were some of the fastest growing early on.
She's vigorous.
It's one of these here.
My
Right
plants were
there.
massive. They filled out the whole tent. And Smart Poker had a
Hold on.
big, beautiful Amy Aces, and so have many others.
There we go. There's an Amy Aces. There's an Amy Aces. There's an Amy Aces. There's an Amy Aces.
The Taiwanese
Oh,
cousins
yeah.
of all the American Amy's.
Another Amy Aces. Amy Aces.
Not
Amy
Taiwanese.
Aces. Amy
Thailand.
Aces. Amy Aces. Amy Aces.
All right.
About 25 of them, so we'll get a good pheno hunt on those.
Very cool. Thank you.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and then I gave a couple to
buddy.
Canatai and to Infamous, so gonna get
Very
a couple
cool.
of those good ones out. So the good homies. We have a small little network now of good breeders and stuff. We've been sending exchanging pollen between each other and stuff, and there's a good group of people that are trying to carry up the good torch, you know.
Helps to have a
But
team.
back here we have our pond. Well, gates open. This is going to be the 4 new greenhouses that we're starting construction on in 2 weeks. You can see they're just finishing leveling off the grade. And then this is our pond. This is the first pond. There's another pond like this in the back, which if I walk all the way out there, the phone will cook off.
What part of Thailand are you in, if you're allowed to say?
Sure, I'm in Phetchabun province. I don't know, 40-ish, 35-ish kilometers south of the city of Phetchabun in the rice fields. I mean, you can see it's rice
Is there
fields around
fish
us.
in that pond, Potent? Or you guys?
Oh yeah, we have tilapia. There's tilapia, snakeheads, betas. There's a couple different minnow fish in there. There's catfish in there. There's turtles.
It's
All
cool,
kinds of shit.
man.
Because when the fields flood, it's like a giant lake here. Like we're on like an island.
No.
So in there we have our nursery. This is our office / dispensary. We can legally sell out of there.
Are you
little counter and
elevated to
everything.
the rest of the land around you? Is that how you're like a little
Yes.
island? You're just physically above?
Yeah, we're like 8 feet above everything else.
That's funny. That's like just enough
I
to
can
get
show
out
you.
of like the rice paddy.
I'll show you. I mean, it's maybe not even 8 feet, maybe like 4 or 5. But I mean, that's the
Water will find
That's
its
the
level
grade.
though, lower.
that gets water down there. So maybe 4 or 5 feet above the actual field, the water level.
Always like they do in Holland.
So this is a flowering project we're doing for seed. We're just processing all the plants right now. You can see we chopped the first couple yesterday. We'll be going through all the rest today. Pulling the seeds out and then hashing all the plants. So that's that. This was full and I thinned them all down to just these couple for breeding. So we had 3 really nice Dosido males from the same line and then a bunch of really stinky Thai stuff that we kept. So those would be some good hybrid seeds. We'll make sure we get some of that available to you guys. And then we have our soil mixer. We mix up all of our soils and stuff here. All of organic soil inputs, rice hulls, and all the rest of the stuff. And this will be our breeding space. So we'll have 7 breeding rooms across here. We'll have 4 flex rooms. We'll probably use these 2 for breeding or drying. These 2 for drying, the top 4 for drying, and then these 2 for excess production or whatever makes sense financially, clones or flour or drying or whatever. So at the time. So this is our big playpen, and then we'll have this is going to get built out and enclosed, and then we'll have a little testing lab and everything in here.
We'll have you back
We'll
on
have,
when it's all finished up. We'll definitely have to have you show us. This is like the before, and we'll have this as like our
Yeah.
date and time stamped. We get to see what it was like now, and it'll be cool to see it in a few weeks or months when things are
Yeah.
a little bit further along as far as the finishing up that development, seeing those new greenhouses, seeing all the plants further along, like the Amy Ace's hunt and the rest of the stuff that you just showed off in the hunt in flower would be awesome. We definitely have seen that with Dog Doctor and many others who've come on in the past. I love to show off the gardens of the people in the community, and you've been gracious enough to have me on your shows in the past, and we're always happy to have you as a guest. It's great to see you whenever you pop up in the chat.
So this is the IPMO as well. So this has been really helping us keep the plants healthy and keep the bugs away. This is same as IMO from KNF, except we put a third of the weight of the rice as crickets or insect frost. Works really well.
Is that what you kind of, it seems like you figured that out when you were working in South Africa or somewhere in Africa with like the locust or something? You said you were spraying.
Yeah. Yep. And then we have our regular IMO here. Oh no, it's in this one. Too many containers. I don't know.
It's like Canatai Seed's wife with all of her different little ferments.
Oh yeah. Then we have our brewers. They brew up everything in here with the pump and all. You can see all of our air stones tied up. So trying to be as organic as we can. So, but yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks for letting me show off.
It was great to have you. This was
honestly
a fun change of pace, and we really do look forward to having you back on in the future to see how things progress. We wish you nothing but the best, and I know that you're a really hard worker and you've got a lot of experience with this, so I have no doubt that it's going to be a great success for yourself, and you're going to be diligent and do the things that need to be done to make sure that happens. So thank you for showing off the garden, and where can the people find you?
You guys can find me on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, all the things on Growing with Fishes and Dat Smoke Show, DAT Smoke Show.
Thank you so much for joining us. And next up, Dog Doctor.
Sorry. Thank you. Dude, looks great. Congratulations, man. What a dream you're doing there. Much respect. Keep it on. We'd like to thank the panel and the chat, of course, this part, and I hope you get good fast as soon as possible, of course. Thank you, chat. You guys are great. Thank you for everything. And I would like to thank my sponsor, Aptos, the nutrients, which I really think that without Aptos Holland, my plants would not be as happy as they are, honestly. And the breeders that have been sending me seeds, Super Sativa Seed Clubs, Dutch Passion, Gadget Phasm, and Fast Buds. And with Fast Bud, I would like to shout out my buddy Daga. Go definitely check him on Instagram. Without him, I would not be testing for Fast Buds. And with this saying, thank you all. I'm Dog Doctor. You can find me as Dog Doctor official in Instagram or as Grow Diaries. Grows love to you all. Thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. It was great to have you. And next up, we got Stairs at Plants.
Thank you guys for having me. You can find me over at growdiaries.com at Stairs at Plants. I don't post on IG, or you can bump into me here on occasion in the chat. Thanks again, and appreciate everyone's input.
Thank you for coming on and showing off the garden. Always a pleasure to have you. Next up, we got Oil Town Oil.
Hey, didn't expect to be doing any kind of closing statements or anything, but I'm glad you guys always have time to feature new growers like me. Always happy to be showing off my garden. I'm glad I get to do that, and hopefully I'll be a part of the New Year's Grow Challenge, but that might be too quick for a turnover for me, but we'll see. Thanks
Where can
again.
the people find you? Where can the people find you?
I mean, you can find me on Instagram. I'll talk to you, but I don't post anything on there. Not yet anyway. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram. Same name as here, Oil Town Oil Instagram. So
no worries. Yeah, the people like to link up even if you don't post.
Message if you want. Thanks again.
Great having you. And I believe that is all of the guests for this week. So I'll pass it first to our regular panelists, to Dr. MJ.
Hey guys, well, thanks to all the guests that came in. I thought it was interesting sort of review of different setups. Really interesting to see Potent Ponics take us around the big pheno hunt, and everybody's grow. It's fun to follow along with through time too. So thanks for that, and thanks for the interesting questions. I am Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com. Check us out. We're getting geared up for the New Year's Grow Challenge. So come sign up for the Grow Challenge and grow along with us on January 1st. And yeah, be back again next week. Grow love, everyone.
Thank you, as always, for joining us, Doc. It was a pleasure to have you. Next up, Matthew Gates.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this sort of refreshing sort of difference. It's nice to see Steve and everyone else here. Really enjoyed the complexity of topics. And we had some really cool conversations as well. If you're interested for pest mitigation information, you can check out my YouTube channel, Zenthanol. You can also find me at zenthanol.com for professional inquiries related to pest mitigation, IPM, that sort of a thing. And also, you can join my Patreon for $1 a month and get direct access to me if you have questions. Occasionally, I feel like that's a really good way to support the YouTube channel, but also sort of get your questions answered quickly. And yeah, it's Sink Angel on Instagram.
Thank you, as always, for joining us and starting us off with that topic to get the show rolling and giving people the heads up about IPM, because a lot of times people seek that information out for themselves, but as much as we can slip it in there and inform our audience as possible, I think it'll make them better growers long term, whether it's for their own garden or helping out their friends and family, whether in person or all throughout the world. The international community of growing, you never know whom you might save, and saving somebody's garden, whether it's yours or somebody else's, is incredibly rewarding. So definitely make sure to be on top of your IPM and check out Matthew and all of his relevant channels. And last and certainly not least from the panel, we've got the American one.
Well, first, thanks to Dog Doctor, Ponics, Stairs at Plants, Oil Town Oil for showing off their grows. And yeah, it's always good seeing the big greenhouse full of plants, as well as the little tents full of plants. So yeah, it's always awesome. And it was great discussion with different topics. I love that too, a whole bunch of different ones. Or if we go through a paper, I love it all. So shout out to everyone here and everyone in chat. Good to see you. And I'm the American one. You guys mostly know where to find me. I'm American One on YouTube and the American One _ with _ Keens on the IG. And yeah, if you're looking for Amy, you can hit me up in the DMs or amyace.com. They'll get on the website eventually. He has them in hand, so it's just a matter of posting them up. So yeah, peace out, everyone. Have a great week. We'll catch you on the next.
Cheers, the American One. Always a pleasure to have you. And I agree. It's great to see the cannabis grown, whether it's in a giant greenhouse with thousands of plants or a tent with just a couple plants. I think as long as there's passion behind it, that's what matters. As long as people love the plant, as long as people are putting their 100% effort into it and trying to cultivate it the best way that they know how to get the highest quality product they know how, that's ultimately what to me is the most satisfying at the end of the day. You could have a tent where somebody is doing it for the wrong reasons and maybe spraying nasty stuff on there and just trying to squeeze some profit out of it, or a greenhouse where there's people that really don't care. They're going to work and they hate it. And I think it reflects in the final product oftentimes. So when you get that dedicated craft group, whether it's a small tent grower or a nice greenhouse, like Potent just showed off, it's nice to be able to support people that are doing it right. And shout out to everybody on tonight's show, the regular panelists and the guests. It was a pleasure to have all you. I don't want to start listing people off because I will forget somebody, but I will type all of your names and information in the comments or little section below in the YouTube, and I'll include that in the podcast for all the podcast platform listeners as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. You can find me at Jack Greenstock, as shown on the screen for the YouTube people. That's where you can find me on Instagram, as well as Cannabis. I'm Jack _Greenstock is my backup account there, and on Twitter. And then if you want to email me, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. Lastly, 50 Strains of Green is still available. I've got some paperbacks. I'll sign it, pack it, and ship it out just like I did the other day for one of the listeners. And still have those available. I've been working on finishing up 50 Strains of Purple, which will be on the same website, 50strains.com. Thank you all so much. This was a great night. I always love these Q&As. I feel like it's our duty to sort of give back to the community and interface with you guys. Try and answer as many of your questions as we can. You guys ask great questions. It gives us great content. I enjoy learning about the people's issues and things that they're struggling with in their gardens to make us all better growers. And so thank you all, everybody who asked questions, everybody who showed up to listen in the YouTube and the podcast afterwards. Very grateful for everybody. Jack Greenstock signing out. Peace and love, y'all.
Grow with love, everyone.